Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Scene, where quiet stories, hidden places, and the lessons they leave behind are explored, slowly, carefully, and with room to breathe. Tonight, we are going somewhere most of us will never go in person. Not because it is far across the world, although for many of us it is. Not because it is difficult to find on a map, although it sits in a part of South Australia shaped by old limestone, clear water, and deep holes in the ground. We're going there because the place itself asks for caution. It asks for respect. It asks us to slow down before we even begin. This is the story of the Shaft, a flooded sinkhole near Mount Gambier, and the 1973 cave diving accident that changed Australian cave diving forever. Now, that may not sound like a gentle subject at first. Cave diving, after all, is not exactly the sort of thing most people associate with sleep. It has darkness, depth, equipment, danger, and the uncomfortable thought of swimming beneath solid rock, which is enough to make some of us suddenly appreciate dry land with unusual enthusiasm. But this story is not here to shock you. It is not here to rush through fear or turn real people into a dramatic warning sign. It is here to understand how a tragedy happened, why it mattered, and how the diving world changed because of it. Sometimes, the most important safety rules are written after something has gone terribly wrong. That is true in aviation. It is true in medicine. It is true in mountaineering, mining, engineering, and the quiet, demanding world of cave diving. A mistake, or a chain of mistakes, leaves behind a lesson. Then people who come later gather around that lesson and decide that the next person should have a better chance. That is how experience becomes training. That is how grief becomes procedure. That is how a dark place can change the way people move through darkness. Before we lower ourselves into this story, just imagine the setting for a moment. Not a grand cave entrance with a wide arch, not a tourist staircase with handrails and signs, not a glowing blue lagoon inviting people down with gentle steps. The Shaft was known for something much stranger. A small opening in the earth, almost unremarkable from above, leading down into a large flooded chamber below. From the surface, it was not obvious that there was a wide underwater world beneath it. It was not the sort of entrance that announced itself with drama. It was more like the earth had left a narrow keyhole, and beyond that keyhole was a room nobody could properly see without going down. And that, in a way, is what made it so compelling. Human beings have always been drawn to hidden places. We look into old wells, we lean over cliffs, we peer into dark rooms before turning on the light. We ask what is down there, what is around that corner, what is beyond the place where ordinary vision stops. Most of the time, curiosity is harmless. It gives us museums, maps, telescopes, and very long conversations about whether one more cup of tea is a good idea. But in some places, curiosity has to be paired with discipline. Not just bravery, not just experience in a general sense. Discipline. The kind that says, this is the limit, and we will not go beyond it today. The kind that says, if the plan changes, we stop. The kind that says, the cave does not care how confident we feel. The Shaft became one of those places where that lesson was learned at a terrible cost. So, before we continue, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you somewhere close to the coast, where the idea of deep water feels familiar? Are you in a city apartment, with streetlights outside and perhaps a cup of something warm nearby? Are you in bed, letting this story settle into the quiet part of the evening? Or are you awake in the small hours when the world feels still and every sound in the room seems a little clearer than usual? And here is another question, one that fits this story more than it may first appear. Have you ever stood at the edge of a place and felt that pull to look closer? Maybe it was a cave entrance on a walking trail. Maybe a lake so clear you could see the stones at the bottom. Maybe an old building, a closed door, a dark stairwell, or just a path in the woods that seemed to keep going after common sense had politely suggested turning back. That little pull is very human. It is part of why we explore. It is also why we need rules, ropes, lights, training, and people willing to say, "Not today." If you find this kind of story calming, thoughtful, or useful in that quiet way stories sometimes are, I would be grateful if you gave the video a like and subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach other people who like to learn slowly, without the shouting, without the hurry, and without pretending that serious subjects need to be told carelessly. And if you know someone who is interested in diving, caves, survival stories, or the history of safety rules, perhaps share it with them too. Stories like this are heavy, but they can also be helpful when they are told with care. Now let us begin above the water, because every cave dive begins there. Above the shaft, the world was ordinary. That is important to remember. Tragedies often begin in ordinary places, on ordinary days, with people doing something they are excited to do. The land around Mount Gambier is not a fantasy landscape. It is farmland, roads, fences, limestone country, and weather that changes like weather always does, without asking anybody's permission. Beneath it, though, the ground is full of old openings shaped by water moving through stone. Rain falls. Water seeps down. Limestone dissolves little by little. Cavities form. Roofs collapse. Sinkholes appear. Some become ponds. Some become caves. Some become places that look quiet from above while hiding serious depth below. The shaft belonged to that world. Its name came from the beam of daylight that could pass down through the entrance when the sun was in the right position. A shaft of light in a shaft in the ground. Simple enough, almost too simple. It sounds like something from a children's adventure story, where the hero finds a hidden chamber and everything works out after a bit of mild inconvenience. But real caves are not written for us. They do not adjust their difficulty to match our confidence. They do not brighten the way ahead because the story would be better that way. They are stone, water, darkness, and distance. They have no opinion, which is exactly why they must be treated with such care. For divers in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Mount Gambier region offered something rare and powerful. Clear fresh water, deep sinkholes, underwater passages, the feeling of entering a place few people had seen. Today, cave diving is known as a highly specialised activity with formal training, strict procedures, redundant equipment, guideline rules, gas management, and a culture built around turning back before a problem becomes an emergency. But in those earlier days, the sport was younger. The equipment was more limited. The culture was still forming. The difference between open water diving and overhead environment diving was not always treated with the seriousness it receives now. That difference matters. In open water, if something goes wrong, the surface is usually above you. Not always easily reached, not always safely reached without considering decompression, but at least it is there in a direct line. In a cave, the surface may be behind you, through a passage, around a bend, beyond a restriction, or hidden by darkness and silt. There may be a ceiling over your head. There may be no daylight. There may be no simple upward escape. A diver cannot solve every problem by rising. In a cave, the way out is a route, not a direction. That is one of the most important ideas in the whole subject. The way out is a route, not a direction. It sounds obvious now. It is repeated in cave diving training in different forms all over the world. But in the early days of recreational cave exploration, many divers were learning through experience, and experience can be a very expensive teacher. Sometimes it charges embarrassment. Sometimes it charges equipment. Sometimes it charges a frightening story told later over coffee with nervous laughter. And sometimes it charges lives. The shaft accident happened on May 28, 1973. A group of divers had gone to the site over a long weekend. They were not people who had wandered in without knowing how to dive at all. That would be a simpler story, but it would not be the true shape of it. They were recreational divers with experience in scuba. Some had dived the site before. They were adventurous. They were capable in the way many divers of that period were capable. But cave diving is not only diving plus a roof. It is a separate discipline. It demands habits that have to be built before they are needed. That is one of the quiet lessons sitting at the centre of this story. Being comfortable underwater is not the same as being prepared for an overhead cave. Being brave is not the same as being equipped. Being part of a group is not the same as being protected by a plan. And seeing daylight at the beginning of a dive does not mean daylight will be there when it is time to come home. The group entered a place that had already attracted many divers. The shaft was known. It was not an unknown hole in the ground stumbled upon by complete accident that morning. It had a reputation. It had depth. It had the strange beauty of clear water in a large chamber, and that famous beam of light from above. For a diver, especially one with a taste for exploration, it must have been unforgettable. Imagine descending into a chamber where the daylight narrows into a bright column above you. Imagine the water still enough that your own bubbles seem loud. Imagine rock walls fading away into blue, then grey, then black. Imagine the feeling that you are not just swimming, but entering a hidden part of the earth. Then imagine how quickly that beauty can become a problem when the light is no longer enough. Cave diving accidents are rarely caused by one single thing. They are usually chains. One decision links to another. A small change in plan, a little extra depth, a little more time, a missing line, a light that does not reach far enough, a group that separates. A moment of uncertainty, a breath taken faster because the body has noticed danger before the mind has fully arranged it into words. None of these pieces may seem enormous alone. Together they can close the exit. That is why modern cave diving is so strict. To someone outside the sport, the rules can sound almost severe. Always maintain a continuous guideline to open water. Always carry enough gas to exit with reserves. Always have backup lights. Always stay within training. Always plan the dive and dive the plan. Always turn the dive when the first limit is reached. These rules are not there to make diving less enjoyable. They are there because underwater caves do not forgive improvisation easily. A cave is not impressed by enthusiasm. A cave does not make exceptions for a good mood. The people who died in the shaft were Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman. Their names matter. It is easy, in stories like this, for people to become numbers. 4 fatalities, 4 divers, 4 victims. But each name belonged to a person with a life above the water. A person who had plans beyond that day. A person known by friends and family, not as part of a safety case study, but as someone real. When we talk about how the tragedy changed cave diving, we should not let the safety lesson erase the human loss. The rules that came later mattered because people mattered first. There were survivors too, and that is another part of the story that deserves care. Surviving an accident does not mean simply walking away from it. The people who came out of the shaft had to surface into a world that had changed in minutes. They had to understand that friends were missing below them. They had to face the terrible gap between hope and reality. In any diving accident, those who survive often carry questions for years. What did I see? What could I have done? When did the moment turn? Those questions are not easy, and they are not ours to handle carelessly. We can only say that the accident did not end when the surviving divers reached air. In many ways, that was when another kind of ordeal began. The recoveries were difficult and took time. That fact alone tells us something about the place. In many accidents on land, reaching the person is hard enough. In the shaft, even recovery required divers to return to the same unforgiving environment, with better equipment, more planning, and a deeper understanding of the risk. It was not a simple matter of going down and bringing people back. The cave had depth, darkness, and complexity. The water could be disturbed. Visibility could change. The people attempting recovery had to manage their own safety while entering a place that had already shown what could happen when limits were exceeded. And outside the cave, the public reaction was strong. That is understandable. A single diving death is serious. 4 deaths in one place, in one incident, in a sport that many people already viewed as mysterious and risky, drew attention far beyond the diving community. Landowners, police, government officials, divers, and the public all had reason to ask what should happen next. Should these places be closed? Should cave diving be banned? Should divers regulate themselves? Who was qualified to enter? Who decided? What training was enough? What counted as proper equipment? And how could anyone be sure that another group would not make the same mistakes? Out of those questions came change. The Cave Divers Association of Australia was formed later in 1973, and the shaft became one of the reasons people understood that cave diving could not remain loose, informal, and dependent on confidence alone. The sport needed structure, it needed standards, it needed training that treated sinkholes and caves as their own environment, not just as interesting variations of ordinary scuba diving. It needed a way to assess divers before granting access to dangerous sites. It needed cooperation with landowners, because many of these places existed on private property. It needed to show the public that divers were willing to take responsibility before responsibility was taken entirely out of their hands. That is one of the reasons this story still matters. It is not only a story about what went wrong, it is a story about what happened afterward. The difference between a tragedy and a lasting lesson is whether people are willing to change. In this case, change did come. Access became more controlled, training developed, cave diving culture in Australia became more organised. The idea that a diver should not enter an overhead environment without the right preparation became harder to ignore. The shaft did not just become a warning, it became part of the foundation for a safer system. Still, we should be careful with hindsight. It is very easy to sit comfortably decades later with modern knowledge, modern equipment and modern training standards and look back at earlier divers as if the answers were obvious. But safety history is often built by people who did not yet have the full language for the risks they were taking. That does not remove responsibility. It does not make poor decisions safe, but it should make us humble. Many things that seem obvious now became obvious because someone paid for the lesson before us. In this video, we will move slowly through that lesson. We will look at the limestone country around Mount Gambier and why it contains so many flooded caves and sinkholes. We will talk about the shaft itself, the strange entrance, the chamber below, and why it drew divers toward it. We will follow the group who arrived there in May 1973, not to judge them from a distance, but to understand the conditions, choices and risks around them. We will descend into the accident carefully, step by step, without turning it into spectacle. We will look at the search and recovery efforts, and then at the changes that followed. Because the real question is not only, how did this happen? The deeper question is, what did people learn when it did? That question reaches beyond cave diving. Most of us will never lower scuba cylinders through a narrow opening in a paddock. Most of us will never swim beneath limestone with a ceiling overhead and a torch beam in front of us. But we all live with limits. We all make plans. We all feel curiosity. We all know the small temptation to go a little farther than we said we would, to assume that because things have gone well so far, they will continue to go well a little longer. In ordinary life, that may only make us late for dinner. In a cave, it can decide whether someone comes home. So, settle in. Let the room around you be steady. Let the surface stay close for now. The story begins not in darkness, but in daylight, above a quiet opening in the South Australian ground, where a narrow hole led down to clear water, and clear water led to depth, and depth led to lessons that cave divers still remember. The country around Mount Gambier does not look, at first glance, like a place designed to hide deep water. Much of it looks practical, rural and calm. There are roads, farms, fences, paddocks, shelter belts, and the ordinary signs of a working landscape. But underneath that quiet surface is a different kind of country. The South Australian government describes the broad Gambier limestone plain as a raised ancient seafloor, with fresh groundwater moving through limestone from inland areas toward the coast. dissolving caves along the way. That is the first thing to understand before we go anywhere near the shaft. The story is not only about divers, it is also about the ground they entered. The land itself shaped the risk long before anyone arrived with cylinders, masks, fins, torches and plans for a weekend dive. Limestone country has a habit of keeping secrets. It can look flat and ordinary from above while holding spaces below it that are wide, deep, flooded and difficult to read. A person can stand in a paddock and be only a few meters from a hole that leads into a chamber large enough to make the surface world feel suddenly very thin. Limestone is not hard in the way granite is hard. It is strong enough to build cliffs and caves and hold up the land for a very long time, but it is also chemically vulnerable. Rainwater absorbs carbon dioxide from the air and soil, becoming slightly acidic. Not dangerous to touch, not dramatic, not something that hisses like a villain in a laboratory, but acidic enough to slowly dissolve calcium carbonate, which is what limestone is mostly made of. Drop by drop, year after year, water finds cracks. It slips through joints. It widens small openings. It makes pathways where there were none, or at least none large enough for us to notice. This is not fast work. Limestone does not hurry, which is probably one of the reasons it makes such strange places. A cave system can take thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of years to form. That kind of time is difficult to picture. We're used to things happening on human schedules. A kettle boils, a message arrives, a road is repaired eventually after making everyone suspicious for several months. But the underground world is built by repetition. Water falls, sinks, flows and leaves with a tiny portion of rock dissolved into it. Then it does it again, and again, and again, until the hidden architecture of the land begins to change. The Mount Gambier region sits within a wider area often called the Limestone Coast. The name is not decorative, it is practical. The rock, water, sinkholes, caves and springs are connected. In the official landscape material for the region, the Gambier limestone is described as a shallow, unconfined aquifer, meaning groundwater can sit relatively close to the surface and move through the porous limestone beneath the land. That matters because the caves and sinkholes are not simply empty holes. Many are part of a groundwater system. The water is not placed there like water in a swimming pool. It belongs to the movement of the landscape itself. A flooded sinkhole is sometimes called a cenote in geological language, though around Mount Gambier the local word sinkhole has been used for a long time. Either way, the idea is simple enough. A cavity forms below ground. Its roof becomes weakened. Eventually part of that roof collapses and the surface opens into the underground space. Sometimes the opening is broad and obvious. Sometimes it is small and easy to miss. Sometimes it holds water so clear that the depth becomes difficult to judge. That clarity can be beautiful, but it can also be misleading. Clear water can make a dangerous place look inviting, even gentle, as if good visibility has somehow made the cave less serious. It has not. Good visibility is useful. It helps divers orient themselves. It helps them see walls, rock piles, restrictions, and the route ahead. It makes photography possible and makes a dive feel less enclosed. But clear water is not the same as safe water. A cave can be perfectly clear and still be an overhead environment. A diver can see a long way and still become lost. A torch beam can travel through clean water and still fail to show the correct way out. In fact, clear water can encourage a person to continue farther than they should, because the place ahead appears open, calm, and manageable. It is one of those situations where beauty and risk share the same doorway. Mount Gambier's underwater sites became famous among divers for exactly that combination. There were sinkholes, ponds, caves, and flooded passages that offered unusual visibility and access to an underground world not found in ordinary open water diving. The Cave Divers Association of Australia lists many dive sites in the Mount Gambier area, including Piccaninny Ponds, Kilsby's Sinkhole, Little Blue Lake, the the black hole, the sisters, tank cave, and the shaft itself. To a diver with curiosity, this region was not just another place to visit. It was a collection of entrances into a different environment, each with its own shape, depth, and level of difficulty. The contrast with the surface is part of what makes these places so memorable. You can drive along a road, past trees and paddocks, then arrive at a place where the ground opens into blue water. It is not like arriving at the ocean, where waves announce themselves and the horizon gives the whole thing away. It is more private than that, more sudden. A sinkhole can feel like the landscape has quietly removed a section of itself and allowed you to look down into what it has been keeping beneath the grass. That quietness is important. Dangerous places are not always loud. They do not always look wild. Some of them sit calmly in daylight, with birds in the trees and farm sounds in the distance. There may be no crashing surf, no storm, no dramatic cliff edge, no warning in the air except the warning a trained person already carries in their own mind. That is one reason cave diving depends so heavily on preparation. The danger is not always obvious from the entrance. It becomes obvious only when you understand what the entrance means. A cave diver looking at a flooded sinkhole sees more than water. They see questions. Is there a direct surface above the whole dive, or does the cave extend beyond daylight? How deep is it? What is the shape of the chamber? Is there a silt floor that can be disturbed? Are there restrictions where a diver must pass carefully? Is there a permanent guideline? What is the gas plan? How many lights are required? What is the team size? What is the turn pressure? What is the maximum depth and time? What is the emergency exit procedure if visibility drops to nothing? These questions may sound technical, and they are, but they are also very simple in purpose. They're all different ways of asking, how do we come back? That question becomes more serious in limestone caves, because the water and rock can create spaces that are difficult to understand from one view. A large chamber may slope away, a tunnel may open from the side, a rock pile may look like a landmark when you descend and like something else entirely when you return from a different angle. Light behaves differently underwater. Distance can be hard to estimate. Depth changes the body and the mind. Breathing gas is limited. A diver's bubbles rise, but in a cave the bubbles do not lead home. They only find the ceiling. It is worth taking a moment with that idea. In open water, bubbles rising can be comforting. They point toward the surface. In a cave, bubbles rise until they hit rock. They may run along the ceiling in silver trails, but they do not make an exit. A diver beneath an overhead must not think of the surface as up. The surface is back along the route. That difference is so simple and so important that it should feel almost heavy. Up is not out. Out is out. The land around Mount Gambier makes that lesson especially relevant because many of its water-filled features blur the line in a way that can confuse the inexperienced. Some areas may have visible daylight. Some may begin as open-looking chambers. Some may feel like cavern dives near the entrance, then become cave dives as a diver moves beyond the reach of natural light. Modern training separates those ideas carefully. A cavern zone is not the same as a cave zone. Daylight matters. A continuous line matters. Gas reserves matter. But in the earlier period of recreational cave diving in Australia, those distinctions were still being learned, debated and formalised. Before the shaft became a name associated with loss, it was part of this wider attraction. The CDAA describes the shaft as a very popular diving hole during the late 1960s and early 1970s, before it was closed after the 1973 deaths. That popularity tells us something about the culture of the time. People were going there, they were talking about it, they were making the trip because the site had a reputation. It was not merely a hole in the ground, it was a destination for divers who wanted something beyond ordinary open water. This does not mean everyone who went there was careless. That would be too simple, and simple explanations are often unfair to real events. Many early cave divers were careful within the limits of what they knew. They improvised equipment, shared information, and learned from one another because formal systems were still developing. Some were highly skilled in the water, Some were technically curious. Some were cautious by nature. But the problem was that cave diving punishes gaps in preparation. You can be a strong swimmer, a confident scuba diver, and an adventurous person, and still be unprepared for a place where the exit can vanish from sight. The region itself encouraged exploration, because it offered so many variations. One site might be a clear pond with an open surface, another might be a sinkhole with steep walls, another might lead into a submerged passage. Tank Cave, for example, later became known as a complex cave system. Piccaninny ponds became known for clear water and dramatic underwater features. Kilsby's sinkhole developed its own history and reputation. Each name belongs to a different relationship between rock and water. To people outside diving, they can all sound similar. To a trained diver, the differences matter very much. The limestone does not make neat rooms for human visitors. It makes irregular chambers, sloping floors, cracks, bedding planes, and collapsed material. A sinkhole may have a pile of fallen rock below the entrance where the roof once gave way. That rock pile can become a central feature, a point of descent, a visual reference, and sometimes a psychological anchor. In clear water, it can feel stable, as if it is the obvious way back. But underwater, especially under stress, obvious things can become less obvious. A diver low on gas does not think with the same calm as a diver at the surface describing a plan. A diver in darkness with a rising breathing rate may misread the cave, misread the team, and misread time. Depth adds another layer. The deeper a diver goes, the more gas is used with every breath because the surrounding pressure is greater. A cylinder that would last a long time near the surface empties faster at depth. This is not a small detail. It is one of the central facts of diving. At 30 meters, a diver consumes gas much more quickly than at 10 meters. At greater depths, the margin shrinks further. At cold, effort, stress, or confusion, and consumption rises again. So a dive that feels relaxed for a short time can become unforgiving if the exit takes longer than expected. Depth can also affect judgment. Nitrogen narcosis, sometimes called the rapture of the deep, can occur on air at depth and may make a diver feel unusually calm, slow, confident, confused, or detached. It does not affect everyone in exactly the same way, and conditions vary. But it is another reason deep diving and cave diving require discipline. A person does not need to become wildly impaired to make a dangerous choice. A small dulling of judgment, added to a dark cave, limited gas, and an uncertain route, is enough to matter. The limestone landscape also creates another hazard that sounds harmless until it happens. Silt. Fine material can settle on floors, ledges, and rock surfaces in underwater caves. A careless fin kick, a hand on the bottom, or bubbles disturbing the ceiling can send it into the water. Visibility can fall quickly. In a cave, low visibility is not just inconvenient, it can remove the world. The walls disappear, the route disappears, the team's lights become blurred glows. A diver without a guideline may be left searching through milk-coloured water, trying to remember a route that looked simple only minutes earlier. This is why cave divers are trained to use careful finning techniques, manage buoyancy, avoid disturbing the bottom, and rely on a continuous guideline. The guideline is not a decoration. It is not there for nervous beginners only. It is a physical path back to open water. In zero visibility, touch may replace sight. A diver can follow the line out by hand slowly and deliberately, even when the cave has become visually meaningless. Without that line, the mind has to guess, and guessing inside a flooded cave is a terrible position to be in. Thinking about Mount Gambier's caves in this way changes the surface landscape. A paddock is not just a paddock. A pond is not just a pond. A small opening is not just a small opening. The ground becomes a roof. The water becomes a route. The entrance becomes a promise that must be kept. Once a diver passes beneath an overhead, the entire dive is built around returning to that entrance. Every movement away from it must be matched by a planned movement back. Every breath going in is also part of the breath needed to leave. The geology gives the place its character, but human choices decide how that character is met. The caves did not become dangerous in 1973. They were already demanding places. What changed was the level of public attention and the urgency of the lesson. Before an accident, a site can be spoken of in terms of adventure. After an accident, the same site is spoken of in terms of limits. The rock has not changed. The water has not changed. The story around it has. In the years before the accident, divers came from different places to experience these flooded features. Some travelled from Victoria, New South Wales, and elsewhere because the Mount Gambier region had become known in diving circles. You can understand why. Open water diving has its own beauty, with reefs, kelp, fish, wrecks, sand, and sunlight moving across the sea floor. Cave diving offers something else. It offers stillness. It offers water that may be so clear it feels almost invisible. It offers rock forms that have never seen daylight. It offers the feeling of entering a place that was not made for people, which is exactly why the rules have to be stronger than the excitement. A diver entering one of these places is not conquering it. That is the wrong way to think. The cave is not an opponent. It is an environment. It does not resist, but it does not assist. It simply exists under the same physical rules every time. Gas runs out at a predictable rate. Darkness remains dark unless a light works. Silt reduces visibility whether the diver is experienced or not. A ceiling prevents direct descent whether the diver regrets going in or not. Panic uses air quickly. Cold reduces comfort. Depth increases pressure. These facts are not emotional, they are steady. That steadiness is what makes them manageable with training and unforgiving without it. There is also a social side to a place like Mount Gambier. Diving sites are not only geological features, they become meeting places. People exchange stories about them. They talk about the best visibility, the deepest point reached, the narrowest section, the best way to rig equipment, the weather, the road in, the landowner, the previous weekend, the diver who saw something remarkable. A site gathers reputation the way a town gathers gossip. Some of that information helps. Some of it may encourage overconfidence. If people say a site is popular, a new visitor may hear safe. If people say others have done it many times, a diver may hear manageable. But popularity does not remove risk. It can even hide it because repeated success can make danger feel theoretical. That is one of the difficult truths in accident history. A dangerous practice may work many times before it fails. Each successful attempt can make the next attempt feel more reasonable. People begin to trust the pattern. They say, "We did it before. Others have done it. The weather is fine. The water is clear. We will not be long." Most of the time, nothing bad happens, and that becomes part of the problem. Safety can be confused with luck when luck has been generous for long enough. The shaft sat within this wider pattern of fascination, confidence, and incomplete structure. From above, it was not a wide lake with easy entry. It was a small opening leading down to a water-filled chamber. The details of the entrance belong more fully to the next part of the story, but even here, while we are still thinking about the limestone world around Mount Gambier, it is worth noticing how unusual that arrangement is. A narrow surface opening can make a large chamber feel more remote. It complicates access. It makes equipment handling more deliberate. It separates the divers from the ordinary surface world even before they begin swimming. You do not simply step into a place like that. You commit to entering it. That physical commitment can affect the mind. When effort is required just to get into the water, turning around may feel less casual. A person may think, "We came all this way. We lowered the gear. We organised the group. We have done the hard part." But in cave diving, the hard part is not entering. The hard part is leaving safely after something has changed. That change might be a lost light, a separated buddy, a confused route, a rising breathing rate, a broken fin strap, a silt out, a free-flowing regulator, or simply the discovery that the dive has gone farther than planned. A safe diver must be ready to end the dive before pride, effort, or excitement argues back. The limestone world gives no special warning when that moment arrives. There is no bell, no sign appears in the water saying this is far enough. The warning must come from the plan, from the pressure gauge, from the guideline, from the team agreement, from training, and from the willingness to stop while everything still feels fine. That is one of the strangest parts of good risk management. The best time to turn back often feels too early. The best safety decision may feel unnecessary because nothing has gone wrong yet, but that is exactly why it works. The Mount Gambier region, with its clear sinkholes and caves, eventually became a place where those ideas were written into practice more firmly. Access systems, training standards, site ratings and diver qualifications became part of the culture. The CDAA's own listing of dive sites now marks sites by rating and access conditions, which reflects a much more organised approach than the informal early years. That organisation did not appear from nowhere. It grew because the underground environment demanded it, and because accidents made delay unacceptable. To understand the shaft, then, we have to hold two views at once. From one view, it was part of a remarkable natural landscape shaped by limestone, water, time and collapse. From the other, it was part of a human story about exploration before regulation had fully caught up with risk. Neither view is complete on its own. The cave did not cause the accident by being a cave. The divers did not create the danger from nothing by arriving there. The tragedy happened where natural hazard and human decision met. That meeting point is where cave diving history often lives. A flooded cave can be beautiful. It can be scientifically interesting. It can contain rare life, delicate formations, unusual water chemistry, and clues about how a landscape works. It can also be a place where a small error becomes serious quickly. This is not a contradiction. It is the whole reason these places must be treated carefully. Respect is not fear. Though fear may sometimes be useful if it keeps a person from pretending, respect means seeing the place clearly. It means knowing that clear water can still be deep, that daylight can fade, that confidence is not a navigation system, and that the cave will still be there another day if the safest choice is to turn around. Above Mount Gambier, life continues in ordinary ways. Rain falls on roofs and paddocks, water sinks into soil, it moves through limestone, it follows cracks and pressure and gradient, slowly heading toward the coast. In some places it emerges in springs and wetlands. In others, it sits in chambers below ground, still and clear, waiting beneath openings that may look small enough to ignore. The official material for Piccaninny Ponds describes groundwater moving from shallow areas north of Mount Gambier toward the southern coast through porous Gambier limestone. That same broad movement of water is part of the reason the region became so full of caves, sinkholes, and diving sites. The divers who came to this country in the early 1970s were entering more than isolated holes. They were entering a connected limestone landscape. They may not have thought of it in those exact terms every time they packed a car or filled a cylinder, but the connection was there beneath them. The water in one place, the cave in another, the sinkhole in a paddock, the spring near the coast, the porous rock between them. It was a landscape built by seepage and collapse, and it offered a kind of access that felt both rare and personal. For a diver, that access could feel like an invitation. For a cave, it was only an opening. There is a difference. An invitation suggests welcome. An opening simply exists. The gap in the ground does not say enter. It does not say stay away. It does not explain itself. People bring meaning to it. They bring desire, skill, equipment, judgment, and sometimes the assumption that because a place has been entered before, it can be entered again in the same way. The limestone world beneath Mount Gambier accepted all of that without comment. By the time the group arrived at the shaft in May 1973, this landscape already had its reputation. It had drawn divers toward its clear water and hidden rooms. It had already shown that the surface could be deceptive and that underwater limestone was not a casual playground. Yet the full force of that lesson had not settled into the systems that would later define Australian cave diving. The ground was ready. The water was waiting. The narrow entrance was there in the paddock, small at the top and much larger below, and the divers who came to it were about to discover how quickly a place that seems quiet from above can become difficult to understand once the daylight is behind you. At the centre of this story is a detail that feels almost too small for what came after it. The entrance to the shaft was not a wide lake, not a cave mouth large enough to walk through, and not a dramatic blue pool set neatly beside a visitor path. It was a small opening in a paddock on private land near Allendale East, south of Mount Gambier. Modern site descriptions still identify it as being on private property, with an entry hole about 1 metre across, and access now controlled through cave diving requirements and supervision. That contrast is what makes the place so unsettling to imagine. Above ground there is farmland, grass, fences, a hole in the earth that could almost be mistaken for something ordinary if you did not know what it was. Below it there is water, depth, a flooded chamber, and a much larger hidden space. It is the kind of place where the surface gives away almost nothing. A person standing beside the entrance would not see the full shape of the cave. They would not see the underwater slopes, the rock pile, the dark openings, or the deeper sections beyond the comfortable reach of daylight. They would see a way in. And in cave diving, a way in is never the same thing as a safe way out. The commonly repeated account of the shaft's discovery begins in 1938 in Thompson's paddock, when a horse reportedly stumbled into or over a small opening, revealing that the ground was not as solid as it appeared. Early descriptions say the opening was only about a foot across before it was later enlarged for access. Beneath that small hole was not a narrow well ending quickly in mud, but a solution feature opening into a flooded sinkhole. Over time, the entrance was made large enough for exploration, and by the mid-1960s divers had begun descending into the water below. There is something quietly practical about that discovery story. Not a scientist with a measuring instrument, not an expedition with a plan, a horse, a paddock, and a patch of ground that gave way. It is a very Mount Gambier kind of beginning, because in limestone country the surface can look complete, while the rock beneath has been hollowed, widened, weakened, and reshaped by groundwater. The land can carry animals, vehicles, crops, and fences for years, while below it water has been doing its slow work in the dark. Then one day a small part of the roof opens, and the land reveals that it has had another level all along. For divers, the shaft became famous partly because of its unusual entrance, and partly because of what waited below it. It was not simply a hole filled with water. Descriptions of the site place the water level several metres below ground, with a larger chamber opening out beneath the small surface hole. One summary describes the water level as about 7 metres below ground level, with the opening widening below and a large main chamber beyond. The same account describes a central rock pile beneath the entrance, with the shallowest part of that rock pile rising to around 36 metres below the water surface, while deeper extensions reach much farther down. So the first challenge was not even the dive itself, it was getting to the water. At many dive sites, a diver walks in from a beach, steps from a boat, or climbs down a ladder into a visible pool. At the shaft, divers and equipment had to be lowered through a narrow entrance into the chamber below. Modern descriptions still refer to the use of a winch or ladder and an appropriate harness for entry and exit. That detail matters because it changes the whole feeling of the place. You're not casually entering water at the edge of a lake. You're being transferred from one environment into another, dry farmland above, a hidden flooded chamber below. The movement between them is slow, deliberate, and dependent on other people and equipment. This would have given the site an atmosphere quite unlike ordinary recreational diving. A diver preparing at the surface would have to sort gear before the water was even visible in the usual way. Cylinders, regulators, masks, fins, weight belts, torches and other equipment would have to be moved carefully. People would have to coordinate, someone would remain above, someone would manage the lowering process. The entrance itself would make the dive feel like an event. Not a simple splash from a jetty, not a gentle swim from a shoreline, but a descent through a small opening into a space that widened beneath the land. That kind of entry can create focus, but it can also create commitment. Once equipment has been lowered, once divers have gone down, once the whole group has invested effort in entering, turning back can feel harder than it should. This is one of those human factors that appears again and again in risky activities. The more effort it takes to begin, the more people may feel pressure to continue, not necessarily because anyone says it aloud. It can be quieter than that. A small thought at the back of the mind. We came this far. We organised all this. We are already here. It would be a shame not to see it properly. In ordinary life, that sort of thinking might keep someone at a dull party for an extra half hour, which is unfortunate but rarely fatal. In cave diving, it can become dangerous. The correct decision may be to stop while the dive still feels manageable. The correct decision may be to turn back before anyone is frightened. The correct decision may be to leave the most interesting part unseen. The cave will not reward patience with applause, but it may reward patience with survival. The name The Shaft is usually explained by the sunlight that drops down through the entrance when conditions are right. Site descriptions say that around midday, a shaft of light can come down through the small opening and reach into the sinkhole. You can understand why that would become the name. A narrow hole above, bright daylight entering from the paddock, a column of light reaching down into water that would otherwise darken with depth. It is a simple visual image, and it must have been one of the reasons divers talked about the place. Underwater, light is not just decoration, it is orientation. It tells the body where the open world is. It gives a diver a reference point, a visible reminder that the surface exists somewhere above and behind. But daylight has limits. It does not fill a large cave evenly. It weakens with distance and depth. It can be blocked by rock, angle, disturbed water, or the shape of the chamber. A shaft of sunlight might make the central area feel less threatening, especially in clear water, but the effect changes quickly once a diver moves away from it. A person can go from being in a place with a visible connection to the entrance to being in a place where the entrance is no longer obvious. That change can happen gradually, and gradual changes are often more dangerous than sudden ones because the mind adjusts step by step. The hidden lake below the entrance was therefore not simply beautiful. It was complicated. The chamber was large enough that a diver could move away from the entrance and lose the simple relationship between up, back and out. Later mapping described the main chamber as roughly oval, and broader summaries give dimensions of about 140 metres long and 80 metres wide. Those numbers are hard to feel from the surface. A 1 metre opening above does not prepare the imagination for a chamber that spreads out below the paddock. It is like looking through a letterbox and discovering that a warehouse sits on the other side, except the warehouse is underwater, dark in places, and shaped by collapsed limestone instead of human planning. The rock pile below the entrance was a central feature. It was formed by collapse material, the kind of rubble that gathers beneath an opening when part of a limestone roof gives way. In a flooded sinkhole, such a pile can become the main landmark. Divers can descend toward it, circle it, and use it as a reference. In the 1973 dive, accounts describe the rock pile as the main point of interest reached during the group's earlier successful dive, and a shot line had been extended toward it before the accident dive. It is easy to see how that would feel sensible. A line down, a known feature, a central pile, a visible place to gather. The problem is that a landmark is not the same as a complete navigation system. Underwater navigation in a cave is not like walking around a room. On land, if you stand in a large hall and look around, you can usually understand the exits because your eyes and body are built for air. You hear space, you see corners, you walk without thinking about buoyancy. Underwater, especially in a cave, the whole process changes. The body is horizontal. The eyes see only where the mask and light allow. A diver may be neutrally buoyant, drifting slightly with every breath and movement. The ceiling can slope. The floor can disappear. A wall can look like a floor if the angle is confusing enough. Silt can lift and change the entire scene. The path that looked obvious going in may not look obvious coming back. This is one reason a continuous guideline is so central in modern cave diving. A line does not rely on memory. It does not care whether visibility is good or bad. It does not become confused by depth, stress, or poor judgment. It gives the diver a physical connection to the way out. In the shaft before modern access and training systems, divers were operating in a different era. Equipment and procedures were not what they are now. Many recreational divers in the early 1970s used open water habits in places that had already crossed into overhead environment risk. Some dives may have stayed within sight of daylight. Others went farther. The dividing line was not always treated as sharply as it would be today. The hidden lake below the paddock could make that dividing line feel softer than it really was. Near the shaft of light, the site might feel like a cavern. Move farther away, and it becomes a cave. Near the entrance, there is at least a visible reminder of the surface. Beyond it, there is only the route, the team, the light from torches, the gas supply, and whatever preparation the divers brought with them. The cave itself does not announce that the category has changed. It does not say, you have now passed from manageable curiosity into serious overhead risk. The diver has to know that before entering. It is worth slowing down over the entrance again because the entrance is the whole promise of the dive. The same small hole that permits access is the place everyone must return to. If a diver becomes disoriented below, the entrance cannot be found by simply swimming upward. This is one of the most dangerous misunderstandings an open water diver can carry into a cave. In open water, when the mind becomes stressed, the body may want to go up. Up feels like air. Up feels like safety. In a sinkhole chamber with overhangs, slopes and ceilings, up may lead into rock. It may lead into a dome with no exit. It may lead away from the route that actually returns to daylight. The shaft's shape made that especially important. The small surface opening did not sit above every part of the chamber like a giant skylight. It was a narrow access point into a much broader void. This means that a diver could be beneath solid rock while still being inside the same general sinkhole. The surface was not everywhere above them. The surface was at one particular place. That is an easy sentence to understand while sitting safely in a chair, and a much harder fact to live with when breathing from a cylinder in darkness. The hidden water also changed how sound and movement worked. At the surface, a paddock is full of ordinary reference points. The horizon, a fence line, the position of vehicles, the people nearby. Underwater, sound carries differently. Bubbles, breathing, equipment movement, and the faint noise of other divers can become part of the environment, but they do not create a clear map. A diver may see another diver's torch and follow it, assuming that person knows the way. That works only if the other person does know the way. A group can become confident by being together, yet still be collectively wrong. 8 people lost in a cave are not safer simply because there are 8 of them. They may only use gas faster, disturb more silt, and make decision-making more confused. That is not said to criticise the divers before their story has even reached the accident. It is said because the site itself made these issues real. The entrance and chamber created a situation where group confidence could hide individual uncertainty. A person might not want to be the one who stops the dive. Someone else may seem calm. Someone else may be moving ahead. Someone else may have been there before. In a group, especially a recreational group on a weekend trip, confidence can spread quickly. So can hesitation. So can confusion. The hidden lake beneath the shaft also carried the attraction of depth. Modern summaries identify deeper extensions, including tunnels reaching to significant depths. with one eastern section described as reaching a maximum of 124 metres. For the divers of the early 1970s, depth had a different cultural meaning than it does in modern technical diving. Today, deep cave diving requires specialist training, staged gas, decompression planning, redundant equipment, and very clear procedures. In that earlier period, the boundaries were less settled. Some divers were pushing deeper on ordinary air with equipment that would now seem limited for the environment. The danger of nitrogen narcosis, gas consumption, decompression obligation, and loss of orientation all became more serious with depth. A large clear chamber can make depth deceptively easy to enter. There is no current pushing you back, no crashing wave warning you that this place is too rough today, no narrow passage at the beginning forcing an immediate decision. Instead, the descent may feel smooth, the water may appear calm, the rock pile may be visible. The diver may feel that everything is under control, right up to the point where control depends on returning through the correct part of a dark three-dimensional space with enough gas left to manage stress, ascent, and any required stops. This is one of the unsettling things about the shaft. The danger was not hidden because the cave was ugly or chaotic. It was hidden partly because the place could seem clear and orderly at first. The small entrance, the drop to the water, the chamber, the beam of light, the rock pile below. These features could create a mental picture that seemed simple. Go down, look around, come back. But the actual cave was not that simple. There were slopes, overhangs, darkness, depth, and side areas where the route back could become uncertain. The phrase hidden lake below sounds almost peaceful. It brings to mind still water tucked away under the ground. In one sense, that is accurate. The water was there, quiet beneath the paddock, not troubled by waves or weather in the same way as the sea. But stillness should not be mistaken for kindness. Still water does not mean simple water. A flooded cave can be calm because nothing is moving, and still be one of the least forgiving environments a diver can enter. The lack of movement can even make the danger harder to sense. There is no surface chop, no wind, no cold spray on the face, just a descent into clear water and the steady sound of breathing. The people who came to the shaft before the accident were drawn by that rare combination. A small, almost secret entrance, a large underwater space, clear water, depth, the famous column of sunlight. The feeling of entering something most people would never see. According to the CDAA's site history, the shaft was a very popular diving hole during the late 1960s and early 1970s, before it was closed in 1973 after 4 divers died there. That popularity is important because it shows the site was not ignored or unknown. Divers had been there, stories had circulated, the place had become part of the regional diving culture. Popularity can make a site feel familiar even to someone who's not fully understood it. If many people have dived a place, the mind may soften its warning. It may think, if this were truly dangerous, surely people would not keep coming here. But risky places often have long periods of success. That is what makes them persuasive. If every unsafe decision caused an immediate accident, humans would learn very quickly. More often, unsafe decisions work until they do not. A group can dive beyond prudent limits and return safely. Another group can do something similar and return safely. Then the pattern becomes a story. We did it. They did it. It was fine. The cave has not changed. Only the margin has been used without being noticed. The small hole in the paddock also created a strange relationship between the people above and the people below. Anyone remaining at the surface could not simply watch the dive unfold. They could not see the divers moving around the chamber in real time. They could not easily know whether the team was staying close to the rock pile, moving toward a deeper section, or having trouble. At many surface activities, observers can intervene when something begins to go wrong. In cave diving, especially through a small entrance, the surface team may know very little until divers return late, return distressed, or do not return at all. This separation adds to the seriousness of the sight. The paddock may be sunny. The people above may be preparing food, managing equipment, talking, waiting, or checking the time. Below, the divers are in an entirely different situation, where every breath has a cost and every minute changes the plan. The distance between those two worlds is not great in meters, but it is enormous in practical terms. A person can be almost directly beneath the surface and still beyond quick help. That is one of the hard facts of overhead diving. Near is not always reachable. Close is not always safe. The entrance made rescue difficult as well. Any serious problem below would require other divers to enter the same narrow access, get into the water, descend, search, manage their own gas and decompression, avoid becoming victims themselves, and then exit through the same restricted surface point. It is not like throwing a rope to someone in a river. It is not like launching a boat toward a visible swimmer. The entire rescue path is underwater, vertical at first, then three-dimensional inside the cave. That is why prevention matters so much more than rescue in cave diving. A good rescue is admirable. A dive that never needs rescue is better. For all of this, it is understandable why the shaft became both attractive and feared. It offered the rare feeling of entering a hidden lake beneath ordinary land. It had a story of accidental discovery. It had a name tied to a bright beam of daylight. It required effort just to reach the water. It contained a large flooded chamber and deeper routes beyond. It gave divers a sense of entering a place apart from the everyday world. But every one of those features also added a layer of risk. The small entrance made access difficult. The hidden chamber made navigation serious. The daylight could mislead. The depth could affect gas use and judgment. The popularity could encourage confidence. The stillness could make the place seem gentler than it was. None of this means the shaft was waiting maliciously. Caves do not wait in that way. They do not lure, punish, forgive, or decide. Those are human words placed onto stone and water. The cave was simply there, shaped by geology, entered by people, and misunderstood in ways that would matter. The hidden lake did not become dangerous because the 1973 group arrived. It was already an environment where training, equipment, and restraint were necessary. What changed was that on one particular weekend, a group of divers would pass through that small opening with a plan that did not fully match the seriousness of the space below. Before that day, the shaft was known as a remarkable dive site. Afterward, it would be known as something else as well. A place where the difference between an entrance and an exit became painfully clear. A place where clear water did not prevent confusion. A place where the surface was close in one direction, but unreachable from the wrong part of the cave. A place where the light above could be seen, lost, searched for, and missed. And so the image remained simple at first. A paddock, a small hole, equipment being organised, divers preparing, the ordinary noises of people getting ready for a dive. Beneath them, a chamber wider than the entrance suggested, with water waiting below ground level and a rock pile far beneath the shaft of daylight. It was not yet a disaster in that moment. It was still a destination, still a place people had come to explore, still a story being set in motion by cars arriving, cylinders being filled, lines being discussed, and divers looking down into a hidden lake that seemed to offer adventure, as long as everyone remembered that the way in was only the beginning. By the time the group arrived in the Mount Gambier area, the shaft already had the sort of reputation that travels faster than official maps. Divers had heard about it. They knew it as a strange place in a paddock, a small opening leading down to clear water, and a chamber that felt much larger than the land above it suggested. It was not a casual beach dive. It was not a reef visited by families with towels and picnic baskets. It was a place people travelled to because it offered something different, something harder to describe to anyone who had not lowered themselves into the dark. The group who came that weekend were not arriving as complete beginners who had never worn scuba equipment before. That would be too simple, and this story is not simple. They were recreational divers, people already drawn to underwater places, people with enough interest and confidence to make a trip to one of the most unusual dive regions in Australia. Their names were John Bockerman, Peter Burr, Christine Millett, Glenn Millett, Stephen Millett, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, and Robert Smith. Joan Harper was also with them, though she did not dive and remained above to help in other ways. In the record, those names sit together as a list. On the day itself, they were a group of people on a weekend away, planning a dive, handling equipment, talking through what they wanted to do, and standing near a hole in the ground that seemed to offer adventure. It is important to pause there, because accident stories can sometimes flatten people into roles. The victim, the survivor, the witness, the leader, the one who turned back, the one who kept going. Those roles may matter later when investigators try to understand a timeline, but before anything went wrong, these were people sharing a trip. There would have been ordinary conversation, practical arrangements, probably small frustrations, perhaps jokes, perhaps quiet nerves, perhaps someone checking a cylinder or adjusting a strap with the mild irritation known to anyone who has ever tried to prepare equipment outdoors. They were not characters placed neatly into a warning story. They were people living through a day that had not yet become history. The weekend had begun with intention. They had come to dive the shaft. Public accounts say they arrived in the Mount Gambier region on May 26, 1973 during a long weekend. The plan was to explore the sinkhole over more than one day. That detail matters because the fatal dive was not the group's first contact with the site. They had already been there. They had already entered the water. They had already reached the central area of interest below. That earlier success likely shaped the confidence they carried into the next dive. Success has a particular effect on the mind. It settles the nerves. It makes a strange place feel a little more known. It can turn a risky environment into something that feels familiar, even if the risk has not changed at all. A person who has walked a path once is likely to walk it more casually the second time. A diver who has descended into a chamber and returned safely may feel quite naturally that the next dive can be approached with more ease. This is not foolish in ordinary situations. It is how people learn. But in cave diving, especially in those earlier days before the full weight of formal safety culture had settled over the sport, that feeling of familiarity could become dangerous. The day before the accident, the group made a successful dive at the shaft. They extended a shot line into the water and reached the rock pile, the central mound of collapsed limestone far below the entrance. They explored around it and returned. From the surface, this would have seemed encouraging. The equipment had worked. The divers had entered and exited. The site had been experienced, not merely imagined. The line was already in place for the next dive, and the plan was to return and continue exploring. There's nothing unusual about that pattern. Many trips work exactly that way. A first day to get oriented, a second day to go a little farther, see a little more, build on what has already been done. That phrase, a little farther, is one of the most important in this story. There is a kind of adventure that grows by small extensions. Not a dramatic leap into danger, not someone declaring that rules no longer apply, but a series of small decisions that each feel close to the last safe one. We went here yesterday, so today we can go there. We reached the rock pile, so now we can look around its edge. We can still see enough. We still have time. We still have air. Everyone seems all right. It is only a little farther. In many outdoor activities, this kind of gradual expansion is normal. Hikers go beyond the next bend. Climbers try a slightly harder route. Divers explore a little more of a site. The difference in a flooded cave is that distance, depth, breathing gas, darkness and navigation all add up quietly. The cave does not become dangerous only when fear arrives. It may become dangerous while everyone still feels calm. The The diving culture of the early 1970s was very different from what cave divers would recognise today. Many recreational divers used equipment and habits suited to open water. A single cylinder was common. Pressure gauges were not always used in the way modern divers would expect. Buoyancy compensators were not universally relied upon. Backup lights, continuous guidelines, formal gas rules, and strict overhead environment training were not yet embedded across the recreational community in the same way. Public summaries of the accident note that the group did not use a safety guideline in the way modern cave divers would require, did not have specific buddy pairs established, and did not have the kind of air management planning that would later become central to cave diving practice. That point should be handled carefully. It is easy to say from the safety of the present that they should have known better. In some ways, yes, the risks were serious, and the decisions made that day mattered, but the systems that now make those risks more visible were not as developed then. People were still learning where the boundaries truly were. Some warnings existed, but not all warnings had yet been translated into standard rules, training levels, access controls, and a shared culture of refusal. The tragedy at the shaft became part of the reason those things changed. The group included people with different levels of familiarity with the site. Robert Smith had reportedly dived there before several times and played an important role in the plan. Others were relying partly on the group, partly on the site's known reputation, and partly on the confidence that comes with being among fellow divers. A group can be reassuring. You look around and see people adjusting gear, preparing calmly, checking equipment, behaving as if the dive is within reach. That steadiness can reduce anxiety. It can also make it harder for a person to speak up if something feels uncertain. There is no need to imagine a dramatic conversation. Most risky group decisions do not look dramatic while they are happening. They look ordinary. Someone suggests, someone agrees, someone assumes someone else has checked. Someone believes the plan is understood. Someone thinks a concern is not worth raising because nobody else seems worried. A group does not need recklessness to drift into danger. It only needs enough confidence, enough momentum, and enough uncertainty left unspoken. On the morning of May 28th, the divers returned after refilling their cylinders in Mount Gambier. The date was a Monday. The earlier dive had gone well enough that the group had reason to continue. Their cylinders were filled. The site was known from the previous day. The shot line was already placed. The entrance waited in the paddock. From above, the day may not have looked like the beginning of anything historic. It may have looked like preparation, gear moving, people waiting their turn, a small opening, a ladder or lowering system, the practical work of getting divers and equipment down toward the water. It is strange how many major accidents begin with ordinary preparation, a strap tightened, a valve checked, a mask cleared, fins placed nearby, someone asking whether everyone is ready, someone else answering yes. These details are so familiar in diving that they can fade into the background, yet every one of them belongs to the boundary between surface and water. Above, mistakes can often be corrected with both feet on the ground. Below, correction may require time, gas, calm, visibility, and a route out. Joan Harper's presence above the water is a small but important reminder that the group existed in two worlds. She did not dive. She stayed near the sinkhole, helping from the surface. Public accounts mention her preparing hot soup and assisting the group in other ways. That detail brings the human scene closer. It was a cold season weekend in South Australia, late May, and someone above was thinking about warmth, food, and the practical comfort of people coming back from the water. That is not a dramatic image, but it is a real one. It makes the surface feel normal. It reminds us that while the divers were preparing for a demanding environment, the trip still had the shape of a weekend outing. There is something especially painful about that contrast. Soup above, darkness below. A paddock at the surface, a deep flooded chamber beneath. people expecting others to return, and those others descending into a situation where return would depend on decisions made in minutes. Accident history often contains these small domestic details, and they matter because they show that disaster does not arrive with a separate soundtrack. It arrives into ordinary life. People bring food, fill tanks, sign guest books, arrange rides, talk with landowners, and make plans. Then one part of the plan goes beyond the margin, and the ordinary day is split into before and after. The public record says the group had not intended to explore beyond a particular area, sometimes described as the edge, a narrowing and downward sloping continuation, away from the main chamber and far from the natural light shaft. This boundary was important. The rock pile and the area near it were understood as the main focus of the dive. Beyond that, the cave became darker, deeper, and less forgiving. Boundaries are only useful when they are treated as firm before excitement begins. A boundary discussed at the surface can seem clear. Underwater, with a group moving, lights shining, depth increasing, and curiosity pulling attention forward, that same boundary can become negotiable. Not because anyone deliberately throws away the plan, but because the cave presents the next few meters as something visible and reachable. A person thinks, just to see, just to look, just a little. And sometimes, by the time the group understands that the plan has changed, the cave has changed around them too. This was not only a question of navigation, it was also a question of air. The cylinders commonly described in accounts were 72 cubic foot cylinders, ordinary scuba cylinders for the era. At shallow depths, such a supply can feel comfortable for a reasonable dive. At deeper depths, gas is consumed faster, because every breath is delivered at higher pressure. Add stress or exertion, and breathing becomes faster again. In a cave, low gas is not solved by swimming upward, unless upward is also the exit. A diver must still travel back through the route, ascend properly, and manage whatever delays occur. Modern divers are trained to think about gas before the dive begins in strict, sometimes conservative ways. They plan not only for themselves, but for the possibility that another diver may need help. Cave diving commonly uses rules that preserve enough breathing gas to exit safely with reserve. The exact rule can vary by training and dive type, but the principle is always the same. You do not use most of your gas going in and hope the way out is simple. Hope is not a breathing supply. In 1973, the group's planning did not match what later became accepted cave diving procedure. The accident would become one of the examples used to show why that mattered. But on the morning they entered, the divers were not thinking of themselves as a future lesson. They were thinking as divers do before a dive. The water below was waiting. The previous day had worked. The line had been placed. The group was ready to continue. They had come for the experience of seeing a hidden place, and that desire is understandable. Exploration often begins with something as simple as wanting to see what is there. The Millots are especially difficult to talk about only as names in a timeline. Stephen and Christine were siblings. Glenn Millot was also part of the group and survived. That means the tragedy contained not only the loss of individual divers, but the shattering of family connection in the middle of a group emergency. It is not necessary to add imagined details to understand how heavy that is. The bare fact is enough. A family went into the water together, and not all of them came back. Gordon Roberts and John Bockerman also enter the story as friends and fellow divers, not as symbols. They were part of the same shared decision to explore the shaft. Their names appear in reports because of the accident, but before that they were part of a living group, people who had travelled, prepared, and descended with others. Any responsible telling of the story has to keep returning to that. The safety lessons are important, but they came from lives, not from an exercise sheet. The survivors would later provide accounts that helped investigators piece together what happened. That too is worth thinking about. Underwater accidents are difficult to reconstruct because there is no simple witness standing outside the event with a complete view. Each diver sees only part of the situation. Visibility changes. People separate. Depth affects memory and judgment. Stress alters perception. Later, investigators must gather fragments. Who turned back? Who saw whose light? Who was near the rock pile? Who moved toward the deeper section? Who surfaced first? Who had little air left? Who tried to return? The final timeline becomes a careful assembly of human memory under pressure. Before the accident unfolded, though, the group still had the energy of a planned dive. There is a certain rhythm to divers preparing together. Equipment checks may be formal or informal depending on training and culture. Someone lifts a cylinder, someone checks a valve, someone tests a regulator and hears that brief rush of gas. Weight belts are arranged, torches are checked, a mask is spat into or rinsed, as divers have done with a lack of glamour since the beginning of mask fog. There may be talk of depth, direction, time, and who goes first. There may also be assumptions, and assumptions are often more dangerous than missing information because they feel like knowledge. The shaft made those assumptions easy to carry. The previous day's success suggested the site could be managed. The rock pile provided a known destination. The shot line gave some structure, though not enough by modern standards. The group size may have created reassurance. The water's clarity may have made the chamber feel readable. The shaft of light may have made the entrance seem psychologically close, even when the divers moved away from it. All of these things could support confidence. None of them could replace a continuous line to open water, strict gas planning, buddy discipline, and training appropriate to the environment. A group of 8 divers entering a cave is also by itself a complex thing. More people means more lights, more bubbles, more movement, more silt disturbance, more opportunities for separation, and more difficulty making decisions underwater. It also means each person may assume someone else is leading, someone else is watching the time, someone else knows the way, someone else has judged the limit. In high-risk environments, responsibility cannot be spread so thin that it disappears. Each diver must know the plan and the limits personally. The cave does not accept confusion as an excuse. There is a quiet sadness in knowing that the group did have some limits in mind. They were not planning, at least according to later accounts, to push deeply into the most dangerous part of the site. They had discussed not going beyond the edge. That tells us the danger was not entirely invisible to them. They recognised that there was a boundary worth naming. The tragedy grew in the space between naming a boundary and holding to it. That space is familiar in many parts of life. People set budgets and then exceed them. They decide to leave early and then stay. They say they will only drive a little farther before resting. They say they will only look at one more message before sleeping. Most of the time, the consequences are small. The habit is human, but some environments make small extensions costly. A cave is one of them. It takes the ordinary human weakness for just a bit more and places it beneath rock, in darkness, at depth, with finite air. By the time the divers were ready to descend, the trip still had not become an accident. It is important not to rush past that. There was still a chance for the dive to remain within limits. There was still a chance for everyone to return, drink something warm, talk through what they had seen, and leave the shaft as a memorable place rather than a historic tragedy. That possibility existed right up until it did not. Accident chains are frightening, partly because they are made of moments that could have gone another way. The people at the surface would have seen divers enter one by one or in small sequence, moving through the narrow access toward the water below. The sunlight above the paddock would not have followed them fully into the chamber. The equipment, heavy and awkward on land, would become more manageable in water. The first breaths underwater would sound close and mechanical. Lights would begin to matter more. The group would gather, orient, and begin the dive that they believed they understood well enough to attempt. Above them remained the small opening, the cars, the land, and Joan Harper waiting. Below them waited the rock pile and the darker continuation beyond it. Between those two worlds was the route everyone needed to remember, protect, and return through. The weekend adventure had reached the point where curiosity became action, and action became descent. The group had come to see what lay beneath the paddock, carrying with them confidence from the day before, equipment from their era, and a plan that would soon be tested by depth, darkness, and the simple, unforgiving fact that in a flooded cave, every metre forward has to be earned twice. The first part of the descent must have felt controlled. That is one of the uncomfortable things about this story. It did not begin with immediate panic. It did not begin with a piece of equipment obviously failing at the surface, or a storm arriving, or a warning sign that everyone ignored while dramatic music played in the background. It began the way many dives begin. People entered the water. Breathing shifted from air around the face to air through a regulator. The noise of the paddock above faded. The group moved down into the clear water beneath the small opening, with the shot line already placed from the earlier dive and the familiar shape of the rock pile waiting below. For a short while, everything could have seemed to be going as expected. That is often how serious accidents hide themselves at the start. The early steps look normal. A diver checks a gauge, a torch beam moves over rock, bubbles rise and spread along the ceiling. Someone looks across at another diver and sees a signal. The body settles into the work of diving. The gear that felt heavy on land becomes manageable in the water. The sound of each breath becomes steady enough that the mind begins to accept the place as workable. The opening above is still somewhere behind them, and the gentle beam of daylight still gives the site its name. The shaft had that famous light because the small surface hole allowed sunlight to reach down into the water when the sun was in the right position. The light could make the main chamber feel less closed than it really was. It gave divers a bright reference point, a reminder of the entrance, a visible connection to the ordinary world above. In clear water, a beam like that can seem almost friendly. It can draw the eye upward. It can make the dark rock around it feel less absolute. It can suggest without saying it that the way home is obvious. But the cave was much larger than the beam. Light underwater does not behave like confidence wants it to behave. It weakens, scatters, and disappears around bends and slopes. A bright patch near the entrance does not illuminate every corner of a chamber. The farther a diver moves from it, the less useful it becomes. At first, the change may be barely noticeable. The entrance is still present. The water is still clear. Torches are working. The group is together enough to feel like a group. The rock pile is below. The plan is still in place, or at least it may seem that way. The rock pile was the central feature beneath the entrance, a mound of collapsed limestone lying far below the water surface. It had been reached the previous day. It was the point around which the earlier successful dive had been organised. In the minds of the divers, it was likely the known area, the place already visited, the landmark that gave the second dive its first shape. The group descended toward it, and as long as they stayed near that feature, the dive may have felt like a continuation of yesterday's success. That earlier success mattered because it softened the unknown. The first dive had not ended badly. The group had returned. The line had been placed. The site had become, in a very limited but powerful way, familiar. A cave can become familiar in pieces. The entrance, the descent, the rock pile, the first turn, the view back toward the light. But familiarity with a piece is not familiarity with the whole. A person can know one room of a building and still be lost in the corridors beyond it. Underwater, that difference is more severe, because getting lost uses breath, and breath is measured in minutes. At the perimeter of the rock pile, the safe shape of the dive began to thin. The group had discussed not going beyond the edge. That edge was not a painted line on the floor. It was not a gate. It was not a sign. It was a change in the cave, a narrowing and downward sloping continuation, away from the main chamber, and away from the reliable comfort of the light shaft. A boundary like that depends on human discipline. The cave does not enforce it. The cave simply continues. This is a difficult moment to describe. because it is tempting to turn it into one clear decision. They stopped here, then chose to go there. In real underwater movement, it may not have felt so clear. A group approaches the edge. Someone looks farther in. The torch beam reaches ahead. A slope continues downward. A dark space becomes visible. One diver moves a little. Another follows. Someone pauses, perhaps thinking the others will only look. Someone else assumes the plan has changed because nobody has objected strongly enough. Signals underwater are limited. Conversations are reduced to hand movements, light beams, eye contact and body position. A full sentence becomes a gesture. A warning becomes a shake of the head. Uncertainty can become movement before the group has truly agreed on what is happening. It is one of the reasons surface planning is so important. Underwater is a poor place to negotiate the meaning of a limit. The descent beyond the gentle beam of daylight was not only a movement through space, it was a movement from one category of risk into another. Near the entrance, a diver may still have a relationship with natural light. Beyond the edge, that relationship weakens or disappears. Near the rock pile, the group had a central landmark. Farther away, the cave began to demand more deliberate navigation. In the main chamber, the dive might still have felt like visiting a known feature. Beyond it, the divers were entering a darker, deeper, less forgiving part of the site. The water may have stayed clear at first. That matters, because clear water can delay fear. If the cave had immediately turned into a black cloud of silt, perhaps more divers would have stopped. If a wall had narrowed sharply, perhaps the boundary would have been obvious. If the floor had dropped like a cliff in front of them, perhaps the group would have treated it differently. But the accounts suggest a gradual movement toward a downward sloping continuation, a place where the floor seemed to fall away, and the divers went farther than they had planned. In such conditions, danger can arrive not as a wall, but as a slope. A slope is persuasive. It does not feel like crossing a line, it feels like continuing. At depth, every part of the situation becomes less forgiving. The divers were breathing compressed air, and at the depths reported around the rock pile and beyond, nitrogen narcosis would have been a serious concern. Narcosis can be subtle. It does not always announce itself as confusion. It may feel like confidence, calmness, tunnel vision, delay, or a strange unwillingness to treat danger as urgent. A diver affected by narcosis may still swim, signal, look normal, and believe they are thinking clearly. That is part of what makes it dangerous. The mind judging the impairment is the same mind being impaired. Robert Smith recognized the signs in himself. According to accounts, at around 180 feet, he felt the effects of nitrogen narcosis and signaled that he was returning toward the top of the rock pile. That decision likely saved his life. It also shows how close the group already was to a serious limit. An experienced diver feeling narcosis and choosing to return was not a small detail. It was a warning from the body and the environment together. Smith's signal should have meant the dive was turning for everyone, or at least that the group was now at a point where the original plan had clearly reached its limit. But the others signaled that they were going to continue exploring. Again, it is important not to imagine this as a villainous decision. It may have felt manageable in the moment. They may have thought they were only going a short distance. They may have believed they still had enough air. They may have expected to remain oriented. They may have trusted the clear water, the group, their torches, and the memory of the way back. They may also have been affected by narcosis in ways they could not fully recognize. In underwater caves, poor decisions do not always feel poor while they are being made. Sometimes they feel ordinary or even calm. Smith stayed near the rock pile for several minutes, while others moved farther into the cave. That image is one of the story's turning points. One diver remaining near the known feature, the others moving into a darker continuation. The group was no longer functioning as a single unit. Some were still near a landmark. Some were beyond it. Some would later return. Some would not. This separation did not need to be dramatic to become deadly. It only needed to break the simple structure that might have brought everyone home together. Modern cave diving training places enormous importance on team discipline. Divers move together. They turn the dive together. They maintain contact with the line. They communicate gas pressures. They know who is leading and who is following. They do not allow the team to stretch into a loose collection of individuals with different plans. The reason is not because divers enjoy rules for their own sake, although some technical divers do seem to enjoy a checklist with the quiet enthusiasm of someone alphabetizing a spice rack. The reason is that a cave punishes confusion. If one diver turns and others continue, if one diver thinks the dive is over and another thinks the exploration has begun, the team has stopped being a safety system. As the divers moved beyond the area they had agreed to avoid, the light from the entrance faded as a useful guide. The cave became a torchlit environment. Torchlight is narrow. It shows what it touches and leaves everything else unknown. In open water at night, a diver can still usually go up. In a cave, the torch beam becomes not just a way to see, but a way to build a temporary world. Wherever the beam points, there is rock, silt, water, another diver, a bubble trail, perhaps the slope of the floor. Where it does not point, there is nothing the mind can safely assume. That can create a strange psychological effect. The visible area feels real, while the unseen area becomes easy to ignore. A diver may focus on the person ahead, the next rock surface, the next opening, the next meter. The exit, now behind and above through a particular route, becomes less present. Not forgotten exactly, but less powerful than the immediate scene. The cave asks for attention, and attention is limited. Gas pressure, depth, time, buddy location, direction, line, light, and physical comfort all compete for space in the mind. The group did not have the kind of continuous safety guideline that would now be considered essential for this dive. The shot line was present, but accounts note that it did not extend all the way to the cavern floor and was not a proper cave guideline leading from open water through the route being explored. This distinction matters. A line that helps with descent to a known area is not the same as a line that protects a team through an overhead environment. If divers leave the line and swim into a cave zone, they are depending on memory, visibility, and judgment. Those are fragile tools when depth, darkness, narcosis, and stress begin to work against them. A continuous guideline is a humble thing. It is just line, thin, physical, simple. It is not impressive in the way a powerful torch or a complex dive computer may seem impressive. But in a cave, it can become the most important object in the water. It gives a diver a route when the mind is tired. It gives a hand something to follow when the eyes are useless. It does not become frightened. It does not become narcotic. It does not decide that maybe the exit is over there because over there seems brighter. It simply leads back if it has been placed correctly and maintained. Without it, the descent into the darker section became a matter of human orientation, and human orientation underwater is not as reliable as we would like to believe. People often imagine getting lost as a sudden realization. One moment you know where you are, and the next moment you do not. Sometimes that is true. More often, especially in a place like a cave, disorientation comes in stages. First, the way back is still assumed. Then it is not immediately visible. Then someone thinks it must be nearby. Then the first wrong direction is tried. Then breathing rate rises. Then the cave begins to look less like a place and more like a set of surfaces that refuse to arrange themselves into a route. Then the mind becomes busy with fear, and fear makes it harder to solve the problem that fear is responding to. The descent beyond daylight also brought them toward a part of the cave where silt and loose material could be disturbed. The more divers moving through an area, the more bubbles, fin kicks, and hand contact can affect the water. 8 divers in a cave can disturb a great deal without meaning to. Even if one diver has good control, another may not. Even if the first few pass cleanly, Later divers may move through water already stirred by the group. Visibility that was clear on the way in may be reduced on the way out. This is another reason caves are dangerous in a delayed way. The route can change behind you, not because the rock moved, but because the water no longer lets you see it. At some point, the dive stopped being exploration and became return. That is the moment when the earlier choices began to demand payment. It is one thing to swim down a slope into darkness while gas remains and curiosity is still in charge. It is another to turn around at depth, with the light beam gone or uncertain, with the group stretched and separated, with air supplies lower than expected, and with the cave now needing to be understood from the opposite direction. The route in and the route out are physically the same, but psychologically they are not. Going in, everything ahead is new. Coming out, everything must be recognised. That recognition is where many overhead accidents begin to close around the diver. A rock that looked distinctive from one side may look ordinary from the other. A slope that felt obvious going down may not feel obvious going up. A ceiling dome may look like an exit because it rises. A dark overhang may hide the correct route. A torch beam may catch suspended silt and reflect back at the diver, reducing the useful range of vision. The body may want to go upward because upward has always meant air. In the shaft, upward from the wrong place could lead into a dome, not the entrance. The phrase gentle beam of daylight becomes more serious here. Gentle things are not always reliable things. The beam marked the entrance only from places where it could be seen. Once the divers were beyond the right angle and distance, the light was no longer a guide. The cave did not become darker because the sun changed its mind. It became darker because the divers had moved where the sun could not help them. There is a lesson in that, though it is a practical one, not a decorative one. Natural light is a condition, not a plan. It may help orientation, but it cannot replace a line, gas reserves, or a team procedure. Some of the divers did make it back. That fact matters because it shows the accident was not a single shared fate that fell on everyone equally. Different divers made different choices at different moments, had different air remaining, different positions, different levels of impairment, and different luck. Larry Reynolds returned before some of the others. Smith and Glenn Millett later met and surfaced together. Peter Burr surfaced with almost no air left. These returns were not casual endings to a simple dive. They were narrow escapes from a situation that had already gone wrong. Imagine surfacing through the small opening into that hidden lake, then out toward the world above, carrying the first clear knowledge that not everyone was there. The sound changes. The air is real again. The paddock is still there. Joan Harper is still waiting. The surface world has not changed, but the meaning of the dive has. A missing diver underwater is one of the most urgent facts in diving. Several missing divers in a deep cave means the situation has already passed from concern into emergency. Before that emergency fully arrived at the surface, the crucial events were happening below, in the space beyond the light. Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts were later seen attempting to ascend quickly back toward the rock pile, but instead of following the slope they had gone down, they swam directly upward into a ceiling dome with no exit. That single mistake shows the central danger of the cave's shape. They were trying to return upward, but upward was not the way out. They were in the wrong part of the overhead. The body's instinct and the cave's geometry were in conflict, and the cave's geometry won. It is hard to stay with that image for long, but the story requires it. Torches searching, a ceiling where the mind wanted an opening, air running down, silt in the water, fear visible even through masks and regulators. Reynolds later reported seeing their lights searching and receiving a signal from Roberts that they were lost. That is one of the most painful details in the whole account. Being lost on land is frightening. Being lost underwater in a cave while low on air is something else entirely. There is no pause button, no chance to sit down and think for half an hour. Every second of thought is also a second of breathing gas. Farther down, John Bockerman was seen swimming strongly deeper into the cave. The likely influence of severe narcosis is often mentioned in accounts. This is one of those details that may feel confusing to anyone outside diving. Why would someone swim deeper when the danger is clear? But narcosis can distort urgency, direction, and judgment. A diver may not understand the situation accurately. They may fixate on a direction, a light, a perceived route, or simply continue moving because the impaired mind has not properly assembled the facts. Strong swimming is not the same as purposeful swimming. A body can move decisively in the wrong direction. Stephen Millet's final movements are less clearly known. His torch and camera were later found deep near the base of the rock pile, while his body was ultimately found at a shallower depth beneath an overhang. That uncertainty is important. Not every part of an underwater accident can be neatly reconstructed. The cave keeps some details. Investigators can locate equipment, bodies, gas remaining, positions and survivor accounts, but they cannot always know the exact thoughts and final decisions of each person. Responsible narration has to leave some space there, not fill it with drama for the sake of neatness. What can be said is that the descent beyond the light created the conditions for separation, disorientation and gas exhaustion. The group went deeper and farther than planned. They lacked the modern safety systems that might have given them a route out. Narcosis likely affected judgment. Silt reduced visibility. Air supplies became critical. Some divers found the way back. 4 did not. A dive can change identity while it is happening. It begins as exploration. Then it becomes a problem-solving exercise. Then it becomes survival. The cruel thing is that the divers may not all recognise that change at the same time. One person may still think the dive is under control while another has already begun to worry. One person may decide to return while another continues. One person may have enough air to solve a delay while another is close to empty. In a strong team, these differences are managed by procedure. In a loose group, they can become separate emergencies. The descent at the shaft shows why cave diving culture later became so firm about limits. The rule to turn a dive is not a suggestion to be reconsidered when the cave looks interesting. The rule about continuous guidelines is not there because divers have poor memory. The rule about gas reserves is not there because instructors enjoy arithmetic. These rules exist because underwater caves create problems that cannot be solved by confidence after the fact. They must be prevented before the fact. If the group had stayed within the area of the rock pile, the day might have ended as the previous day had ended. If the team had turned when Smith felt narcosis, everyone might have returned together. If a proper guideline had been used into the cave zone, lost divers might have been able to follow it back even in poor visibility. If gas had been managed conservatively, there might have been more time to correct mistakes. Each if is painful because it points to a door that closed before anyone fully understood how important it was. Still, the purpose of looking at those ifs is not to sit in judgment over people who cannot answer. It is to understand the chain. The descent was not one mistake. It was a series of mismatches between the environment and the preparation. The shaft required cave diving discipline. The group carried recreational diving habits into a place that demanded more. The site gave them clear water, a known landmark and a beautiful shaft of light, but it also contained depth, darkness, overhead rock, silt, and routes that did not lead upward to air. The gentle part of the place was real, but it was not the whole truth. By the time the surviving divers reached the surface, the dive had already become something else. The daylight above did not feel like a simple ending anymore. It was now the place where people counted heads, looked back at the water, and understood that friends were still below. The small hole in the paddock was no longer just an entrance into adventure. It was the only connection to 4 people lost in a flooded chamber, somewhere beyond the beam of light, where the route back had become hidden at the worst possible time. The moment of being lost inside the shaft did not belong to one person only. It spread through the dive unevenly. Some divers found the route back, some hesitated near the edge of the darker section. Some moved away from the main chamber, some realised the dive had gone too far only when the return had already become difficult. Later accounts pieced together from the survivors described the group moving beyond its agreed limit. without a continuous guideline, then becoming separated and disoriented in deep water. The 4 who died were Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman, and the cause was ultimately understood as running out of breathing air and drowning after they became lost in the cave. That is the plain version. It is accurate, but it is too neat for what the divers must have experienced. Lost is a small word. It sounds almost ordinary. People get lost on roads, in shopping centres, in large car parks, in the back pages of instruction manuals that somehow use 12 diagrams to explain one screw. But underwater, in a cave, at depth, with air running down, lost becomes something else. It is not just not knowing where you are. It is not knowing where the air is. It is not knowing how much time remains. It is looking at rock and darkness and trying to make them turn into a route. In open water, a lost diver has options that may be difficult but still understandable. Ascend slowly, find the surface, inflate a buoyancy device, signal for help, navigate back to a boat or shore. In a cave, those instincts can become dangerous. The surface is not simply above. The surface is through the entrance, and the entrance is only in one place. A diver can be close to the surface in vertical distance and still separated from it by solid limestone. In the shaft, that difference became deadly. The small hole in the paddock was somewhere above and behind, but from the wrong part of the chamber, swimming straight upward did not lead to open air, but led to rock. The surviving divers later described Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts trying to return toward the rock pile after the group turned around. Instead of following the downward slope back the way they had come, they swam upward into a ceiling dome that had no exit. Larry Reynolds reported seeing their torches searching, and Gordon Roberts signalling that they were lost. Accounts also described them as frightened, and that was the last time they were seen alive. It is difficult to stay with that image, but it is important. A torch beam in a cave is usually a sign of control. It means the diver can see. It means the diver has a small world in front of them. But when someone is lost, the same torch beam becomes a sign of searching. It moves across stone, silt, ceiling, shadow, and empty water, looking for something familiar. The beam may find a wall that looks like every other wall. It may find the ceiling which rises but does not open. It may find another diver's light, but that diver may be lost too. It may find disturbed silt that turns the water into a grey curtain. It may find nothing useful at all. The human body does not like this situation. It knows, even before the mind has properly explained it, that something is wrong. Breathing becomes faster. The chest works harder. The hands may reach for rock, line, equipment, another diver, anything that feels certain. But faster breathing uses air more quickly. Panic is not only frightening in diving, it is expensive. It spends the one resource a diver cannot replace inside the cave. Every anxious breath takes from the reserve. Every second spent searching reduces the time available for a calm exit. This is why cave diving training puts so much emphasis on prevention. A lost diver with plenty of gas, a guideline, and a trained team has options. A lost diver with little gas, no line, deep water, and poor visibility has very few. The water around them may have been becoming less clear. Glenn Millett, after surfacing and realising others were missing, put on a spare tank and returned to search. He descended to around 225 feet, where he found Stephen Millett's torch and camera near the edge, but the water was heavily silted and visibility had fallen to nearly zero. He had to decompress and return to the surface. That detail tells us the cave was no longer the clear hidden lake that had drawn divers to it. It had changed, at least for the people trying to navigate it. Silt does not need to fill a whole chamber to cause trouble. It only needs to remove the root from sight. In a silted cave, even a strong diver can become almost blind. The light from a torch bounces back from suspended particles. The beam does not reach far. Instead of cutting through darkness, it lights the cloud in front of the mask. The world shrinks to a few inches, sometimes less. In that condition, a guideline becomes the difference between a route and a guess. Without one, the diver's mind tries to build a map from memory, but memory is fragile under stress. It may insist the exit is up. It may insist the rock pile is to the left. It may recognise shapes that are not actually familiar. It may make the wrong direction feel urgent. That is one reason this accident became so important in cave diving history. The environment did not merely punish inexperience in a general way. It exposed specific missing protections. No continuous guideline into the cave zone. Inadequate gas planning for the depth and overhead environment. A large group that became separated. A dive that went beyond the agreed limit. Standard recreational equipment used in a place demanding specialised cave diving procedures. These are not small matters. They are the core differences between a dive that can be ended safely and a dive that can trap people after one wrong turn. John Bockerman's final movement adds another painful layer. One survivor reported seeing a diver swimming strongly downward, farther into the cave, later understood to be Bockerman. Accounts suggest severe nitrogen narcosis may have affected him, and his body was later found deepest among the 4 victims. That phrase, swimming strongly, can be misleading unless we slow down. Strong movement does not always mean correct movement. A diver can be physically capable and mentally impaired at the same time. At depth, breathing compressed air can bring nitrogen narcosis, which may change judgment, perception, confidence, and response to danger. The person may not feel drunk in any obvious way. They may simply act on a distorted understanding of the situation. Narcosis is frightening because it can take away the very thing needed to recognise narcosis. It may not feel like confusion from the inside, it may feel like certainty. A diver may become fixed on a direction, a light, a slope, or a thought that seems reasonable in the moment. They may delay turning back. They may fail to respond properly to signals. They may underestimate air use. They may continue deeper when every practical rule says to go shallower. The cave does not need the diver to be completely incapacitated. It only needs the diver to be wrong for long enough. Stephen Millot's final moments are less clearly known. His torch and camera were found deep near the base of the rock pile during the first emergency search, but his body was later found at a shallower depth under an overhang. Public accounts note that compared with the others, less is known about his last movements. That uncertainty should remain uncertainty. It is tempting in storytelling to give every person a clear final path, but the cave did not leave that kind of complete record. What remains is equipment location, body location, and survivor memory. The rest should not be filled with invented certainty. What we can say is that Stephen was also separated from a safe exit. Whether he tried to ascend, became caught beneath an overhang, moved while buoyant, or searched through reduced visibility, his final situation belonged to the same chain that trapped the others. Depth, darkness, separation, low air, no proper route marker, a cave shape that made upward movement unreliable, a return that became more complicated than the entry had seemed. Meanwhile, at the surface, the meaning of time changed. A dive has expected rhythms. People enter, they descend, they return. There is a normal amount of waiting. There is a slightly uncomfortable amount of waiting. Then there is the kind of waiting where everyone begins to understand that something is wrong. At first, perhaps there is room for ordinary explanations. Maybe they are taking longer than planned. Maybe they are ascending slowly. Maybe someone had a minor equipment issue. Maybe they are just delayed at depth. But in diving, delay has a hard edge, because breathing gas is finite. When divers are late in a cave, worry does not stay gentle for long. The survivors surfaced one by one, not as a complete group. Reynolds had already come back. Smith and Glenn Millot returned together. Peter Burr surfaced shortly after them with almost no air left in his tank. That last detail makes the narrowness of survival clear. Burr's return was not comfortable. It was close. When a diver surfaces with almost no air left after a cave dive, That is not simply a completed dive with poor timing. It is evidence that the margin has been consumed. For those above, the count would have become impossible to ignore. 4 still missing. 4 people still somewhere below. The small opening in the paddock now had a different meaning. Earlier it had been the entrance to an unusual dive. Now it was the only route back from a place where friends were lost. The land above would have seemed strangely useless. You could stand close to them in distance and still be unable to reach them. You could look at the hole, shout, move equipment, prepare another tank and still know that the actual search had to happen underwater, in the same dangerous space that had already taken control of the dive. Glenn Millott's return underwater with a spare tank shows the urgency and the courage of the immediate response. It also shows the limits of courage. He went back down looking for the missing divers, but near the deeper edge he found only Stephen's torch and camera, with visibility badly reduced. He could not stay indefinitely. He had his own gas limits. He had decompression obligations. He had to survive. The hardest rule in rescue is that rescuers cannot become additional victims. In cave diving, that rule is not a slogan. It is immediate arithmetic. Gas remaining, depth, time, visibility, route. A search that feels morally necessary may still be physically impossible. Peter Burr also returned for another look, but found nobody. By then, the group understood that they were no longer likely searching for living divers. That transition is one of the heaviest in any accident. Hope may remain emotionally, because people are not machines and hope does not obey gauges. But the practical knowledge of diving is harsh. At that depth, after that delay, with those air supplies, the chance of survival falls quickly. The people at the surface would have had to face the fact that the cave had moved from rescue to recovery. Inside the water, though, the 4 lost divers did not vanish all at once. Each reached a final point. Christine Millott and Gordon Roberts beneath the ceiling dome. John Bockerman farther down, likely affected by narcosis and moving deeper. Stephen Millett in circumstances that remain less certain. 4 separate endings within one shared accident. That distinction matters because it prevents the story from becoming too tidy. They were not a single object called the missing divers. They were 4 people in different parts of a flooded cave, each dealing with a situation that had become unsurvivable. The cave itself would have been indifferent to all of it. That is not meant in a dramatic way. It is simply true. The water did not know there was panic. The rock did not know it had become a ceiling instead of a root. The silt did not know it was hiding the way back. The small entrance did not widen because people needed it. Natural places do not become cruel when they are dangerous. They remain physical. That physical steadiness is exactly why training matters. We cannot appeal to a cave. We can only prepare for it. One of the lessons from the shaft is that being lost does not always mean being far away. Christine and Gordon were not on another continent beneath the earth. Stephen was later found at a comparatively shallower depth than where his equipment was discovered. The entrance was within the same site. The group's vehicles, food and friends were nearby. But underwater caves are measured not only in distance, they are measured in access. A diver can be very near open air in meters and still unable to reach it in time. Nearness without a route is not safety. That idea is central to cave diving. The exit is not an area, it is a path. A diver must know the path, preserve the path, and have enough breathing gas to follow the path even if something goes wrong. The path may be represented by a guideline. It may be held in a carefully planned cavern dive with invisible light and strict limits. It may be supported by team procedure and redundant equipment. Without those things, a cave becomes a place where the difference between visible space and usable route can become fatal. Another lesson is that a group can fail as a group even if some individuals survive. The survivors did not all make the same decisions. Robert Smith turned back when he felt narcosis. Glenn Millott monitored his air and knew his time was up. Reynolds returned earlier. Burr escaped with very little gas remaining. Their survival does not erase the group failure. it helps reveal it. The team had stretched apart, and once separated, each diver was left to manage a highly technical emergency without the structure a proper cave team would have required. There is a tendency, when looking back at accidents, to search for one person to blame. It makes the world feel simpler. If one person caused it, then everyone else can feel safer by not being that person. But the shaft is more useful and more honest when understood as a chain. The site was deep and complex. The entrance was small. The light was limited. The divers were using practices that did not match the environment. The agreed boundary was crossed. Narcosis likely affected judgment. No continuous guideline protected the route. Air supplies were insufficient for the situation that developed. Silt reduced visibility. The group separated. Then fear and low gas took away the time needed to solve the problem. Chains matter because they show where future divers can intervene. A proper line breaks part of the chain. Conservative gas planning breaks another. Refusing to pass the agreed limit breaks another. Turning the whole team when one diver has a problem breaks another. Training to recognize narcosis, depth limits, and overhead risk breaks another. Accident prevention is not magic. It is the patient removal of links before the chain can tighten. For the people at the shaft that day, those later lessons had not yet become the organised system they would help create. The survivors were left at the surface with the immediate reality of loss, while the missing remained below. The water that had seemed clear enough for exploration was now part of an emergency that no one present could easily solve. The small hole in the paddock connected them to the cave, but not enough. It allowed entry. It allowed some to return. It did not allow a simple rescue. That is perhaps the hardest part of lostness in dark water. It is not only experienced by the lost diver, it reaches the people above too. They are lost in a different way, not physically, but practically. They know the people are below, but not exactly where. They know time matters, but not how to stop it. They know action is needed, but every action risks another life. The cave has taken a clear day and turned it into a problem with no easy human shape. As the first emergency efforts failed, the accident moved into its next stage. Police, recovery divers, landowners, families and officials would be drawn into a long and difficult process. The bodies would not all be recovered quickly. The cave would keep them for months. The search would expose how unprepared even official teams were for deep cave recovery at the time. The tragedy would not end at the water's edge on May 28, 1973. It would continue through attempted searches, postponed recoveries, public concern, and the slow realisation that cave diving in Australia could not continue as it had before. The first searches began with urgency, but urgency was not enough. That is one of the hardest truths in underwater cave accidents. Once the missing divers were below the surface, in a deep flooded chamber, behind darkness, silt and rock, ordinary human speed no longer mattered in the same way. People could hurry at the surface. They could call for help, prepare equipment, look down through the entrance and try to make decisions quickly. But the cave allowed only the pace that the cave allowed. Every search diver still had to breathe from a cylinder. Every descent still had to account for depth. Every return still had to pass through the same opening. Every minute below still created its own risk. On the day after the accident, May 29, 1973, police divers from the Underwater Recovery Squad searched the shaft to about 200 feet, or 61 metres, but the search was brief and no bodies were found. A second search the next day also failed, and the operation was postponed while the team looked for naval expertise and further training, because the conditions were beyond what they were prepared to handle at that time. That pause must have been unbearable for the families and friends waiting above. It is one thing to know that someone has died. It is another thing to know that they are still below, in a place that people cannot simply enter and leave at will. The surface world may have wanted action, immediate and complete. But cave recovery is not like walking into a room. It is not even like diving for a lost object in open water. It is a planned operation inside an environment that has already killed people. If the response is rushed, the search can create more victims. The police divers knew they were facing a situation beyond ordinary underwater recovery. Chief Inspector Wallace Budd later described the operation as something the team had to learn as it went, which says a great deal about how unprepared official recovery systems were for a deep cave like the Shaft in 1973. The tragedy did not only expose gaps among recreational divers, it exposed gaps in emergency response too. The police could search, but not easily, and not with the confidence that modern specialised cave recovery would require. That matters because it shows how young the whole system was. Cave diving was already happening. Divers were already entering sinkholes, chambers and flooded passages. But the support structure around the sport had not fully caught up. Training, rescue planning, site control, recovery procedures and official understanding were still developing. When the accident happened, the people on the surface were not only dealing with grief, they were dealing with a practical question that did not have a ready answer. How do you safely recover bodies from a deep flooded cave when the teams available are not trained for that exact task? For those waiting, the land around the shaft must have become a very strange place. The paddock was ordinary, but nothing about it would have felt ordinary anymore. The small opening in the ground had become the focus of everything. People would arrive, speak in low voices, move equipment, make calls, and look toward the same place. The cave beneath them held the missing, and yet it was silent. There was no visible scene to watch, no sign of movement below, no way to know what the water looked like inside unless another diver went down and came back to describe it. In most emergencies, witnesses can see at least part of the problem. A fire has smoke. A road accident has damaged vehicles. A rescue at sea has waves, boats, lights, and a visible horizon. The shaft offered almost nothing to the eye. The main event was hidden under the ground. That hiddenness must have made the waiting worse. It would have forced everyone above to imagine what they could not see. An imagination, when someone is missing, is rarely kind. The immediate searches had already shown how difficult the recovery would be. Glenn Millett had gone back into the water shortly after the accident, using a spare tank, and descended to about 225 feet, where he found Stephen Millett's torch and camera near the deeper edge. The silt had been badly disturbed, visibility had fallen almost to zero, and he had no choice but to return and decompress. Peter Burr also made another search but found nobody. By then the group understood that they were no longer likely looking for survivors. That is one of the most painful shifts in any rescue attempt. The first search is driven by hope, the next is driven by urgency. Then, at some point, the practical facts become stronger than hope. The available air would have been exhausted. The missing divers had been underwater too long. The conditions were too difficult. The language changes even if people do not want it to. Search becomes recovery. Friends become bodies. The task becomes not saving life, but bringing people back from the place where life ended. The cave did not make even that possible quickly. For months, the bodies remained inside the shaft. That length of time is difficult to take in. Months passed in the world above. Weather changed. Families waited. The landowners lived with the knowledge that the bodies were still on their property, deep below the paddock. Divers and police considered options. Training and preparation continued. The accident remained unresolved in the most physical sense possible. It was not only remembered, it was still present under the ground. In January 1974, nearly 8 months after the accident, the landowners allowed a television film crew making a documentary about cave diving in the lower southeast to enter the sinkhole. On January 22nd, the crew descended to about 50 feet or 15 metres using professional lighting equipment and illuminated the chamber strongly enough that one technician noticed what seemed to be an unexpected third person behind two teammates. On closer inspection, it was a body in a wetsuit, and the crew surfaced to report it. There is something deeply unsettling about that discovery. After all the searching, planning, waiting and uncertainty, the first body was not found during the original police searches. It was noticed months later by a film crew in a moment that began as documentary work and became something very different. The crew reportedly did not film the body, which is a small but important detail. It shows that even in a setting involving cameras and a public subject, there was still a boundary of respect. Once the reality of a body appeared in the light, the task changed immediately. The next morning, January 23rd, 1974, police divers entered the shaft and found a body at about 50 feet, floating under a ledge against the sloped cavern roof. The body was recovered, and police divers continued searching down to about 180 feet but did not find the remaining 3. The body could not be formally identified by appearance alone and required dental records. It was confirmed to be Stephen L. Millett. Stephen's recovery added certainty, but it did not end the waiting. 3 divers were still below. Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman remained in the cave. For the families, this must have been a cruel kind of progress. 1 person brought back, 3 still held by the water. One part of the grief allowed a more ordinary form, with a body recovered and identified, while the rest remained suspended in the same difficult uncertainty. The position where Stephen was found also showed again how confusing the cave's shape could be. His torch and camera had been found much deeper near the base of the rock pile during the first emergency search, yet his body was found at a much shallower depth under an overhang. Public accounts note that little is known about his final movements compared with the others. That uncertainty matters. The cave did not leave a full explanation. It left locations, equipment, survivor memories and conclusions that could be drawn carefully. Anything beyond that would be guesswork. After Stephen was recovered, attention turned again to the remaining 3. The landowners were increasingly uncomfortable with the fact that bodies were still in the cave on their property. That discomfort is easy to understand. They had not caused the accident, but the accident had become part of their land. The opening in the paddock was no longer just a geological feature or a well-known diving site. It was a place of death, waiting, and repeated attempts to bring people out. Public accounts say the landowners approached an amateur diving team from Melbourne, while the police diving team was also finalising its own recovery preparations. By March 1974, the recovery effort entered another stage. On March 9th, R.G. Traynor and a team of divers went into the shaft with substantially improved diving gear. At about 185 feet, or 56 metres, Traynor saw 1 body lying below him. Looking further, he found a second body directly beneath it. These were Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts. About 20 feet deeper, he found John Bockerman beneath a rock ledge, but he did not have enough air to move the body safely into a better recovery position and had to abandon the attempt. That detail is one of the clearest examples of why recovery diving demands restraint. Traynor found what he had been looking for. He was close. The human urge would be to do something immediately, to move the body, to complete the task, to avoid leaving anyone behind again. But the cave does not become safer because a diver has found the objective. In fact, that may be the moment of greatest danger. The diver is deep, emotionally loaded, working physically, and already committed to a return. Knowing there is not enough air and stopping anyway is not failure. It is discipline. The next day, divers tried to recover the bodies, but the effort failed when the water became too murky. Several more dives were attempted, and the bodies could not immediately be relocated. Finally, on the 3rd day of diving, Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts were recovered from about 195 feet, or 59 metres, on March 11th, 1974. That delay shows how quickly the underwater environment could change. A body seen one day might not be easy to find the next. Silt disturbed by search divers could remove visibility. Rock ledges, slopes and darkness could make relocation difficult, even when the position was roughly known. This is hard to imagine from above. On land, if you find something, you can usually mark the place and return to it. In a deep underwater cave, the act of reaching the place changes the place. Bubbles rise, fins move water, hands touch rock, silt lifts, visibility falls. Then the cave that briefly gave up its information takes it back. Christine and Gordon had been found together below the ceiling dome where they had failed to escape. Earlier survivor accounts described them swimming upward into that dome instead of following the slope back toward the rock pile, likely while trying to return quickly as air ran low. Reynolds saw their torches searching, and Robert signalled that they were lost. This was the last time they were seen alive. Their recovery months later confirmed the terrible geometry of the accident. They had not been far from the idea of returning. They had been in the wrong part of the cave, beneath rock that would not open. After Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts were brought out, John Bockerman remained. Attempts to recover him from about 215 feet, or 66 metres, were made the next morning, but the divers aborted the effort because of nitrogen narcosis. That is another important point. Even after months of planning, improved equipment, and a focused recovery mission, the same physical hazard that had affected the original divers still mattered. Depth still affected the mind. Air still had limits. The cave still demanded a margin. The recovery divers were then sent home for about a month to rest and train further for the final recovery, which was considered the most difficult because of Bockerman's depth and position. The final plan involved one day to secure the body's location with a guideline, a rest day, and another day to recover him. The divers still experienced significant narcosis during the operation, but the improved procedures allowed the plan to work. John H. Bockerman's body was recovered on April 9, 1974, 11 months and 11 days after the accident. 11 months and 11 days is a long time for a story to remain physically unfinished. It is long enough for seasons to turn, long enough for newspaper attention to fade and return, long enough for families to pass through dates that should have belonged to ordinary life while knowing that someone they loved was still underwater. It is long enough for a place to become fixed in the mind not only as the site of an accident, but as a waiting room with no walls, a paddock above a cave that would not release everyone quickly. That long recovery period also changed how the accident was understood. If all 4 bodies had been recovered on the first day, the tragedy would still have been severe, but the public may not have felt the same prolonged pressure. The waiting kept the danger visible. It showed that the shaft was not only dangerous to enter as a recreational diver, it was dangerous even to trained people attempting to recover the dead. It showed that a cave accident does not end when the last survivor surfaces. It can continue for months, demanding more dives, more planning, more courage, and more risk from people who were not there when the first decisions were made. The investigation found that the cause of death for all 4 divers was lack of air with terminal drowning. The coroner, Special Magistrate R.F. Stokes, concluded that the divers overstayed their bottom time, ran out of air, and died of hypoxia as part of fatal drowning. The findings also noted that although the divers claimed experience and some were instructors, they were not experienced sinkhole divers, and appropriate safety precautions had not been taken. Those findings matter because they moved the explanation away from mystery. After the accident, there were claims and questions about whether the air in the cylinders had been contaminated, but tests of the air and equipment did not support that. The equipment was generally found to be of good quality and in good condition, and air samples were within relevant standards. The investigation rejected contaminated air as the cause and pointed instead to the planning and safety failures around the dive. That kind of conclusion can feel stark. It offers no hidden villain, no strange mechanical curse, no simple external failure that lets everyone else look away. The air was not poisoned. The cave did not suddenly collapse. The equipment was not the main explanation. The divers ran out of air after becoming lost in a place where the route out had not been properly protected. That is a hard conclusion because it places the lesson in human procedure. It says the danger was not invisible. It says the missing systems mattered. At the same time, the recovery itself taught its own lesson. The police underwater recovery squad had been formed before the accident, but the shaft became a turning point in its development. Public summaries identify the accident as influential in the development of the South Australian Police Underwater Recovery Squad, along with the restriction of access to cave diving sites and the formation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia later that year. The tragedy forced people to recognise that deep cave recovery required specialised training, better equipment and planning that ordinary underwater search methods could not provide. The waiting also affected the landowners and the wider community. A private property had become the site of a major accident. The question of who should be allowed into such places could no longer remain informal. If a landowner permitted access and divers died, what then? If access was refused, would divers try to enter anyway? If sites were closed completely, would the sport move underground in a different sense, becoming less visible and less manageable? These were not small questions. They went to the relationship between divers, property owners, police, government, and the public. For the diving community, the recoveries made the accident impossible to treat as a single bad afternoon. It was a long event. First the dive, then the failed searches, then months of waiting, then Stephen's recovery in January, then Christine and Gordon's recovery in March, then John Bockerman's recovery in April. The timeline itself became a warning. A cave accident can stretch far beyond the moment when the original mistake is made. It can draw in people who never expected to be part of it. It can force rescuers to face the same hazards. It can leave families without closure for almost a year. The names remained at the centre of it. Stephen Millett, Christus Millett, Gordon Roberts, John Bockerman. Not just 4 divers, 4 people who entered the shaft on a long weekend and did not return with the others. Stephen found first, months later, under a ledge near the sloping roof. Christine and Gordon found together deep below the dome that had trapped them. John found deepest beneath a rock ledge, requiring the most difficult final recovery. Each recovery was both a technical task and a human one. It is easy to think of recovery as the final act of an accident, but in the shaft, recovery became part of the transformation that followed. Each failed attempt demonstrated the seriousness of the environment. Each delay showed the limits of the available systems. Each successful recovery required better planning than the last. The final recovery, with a guideline placed to secure the location, rest built into the plan, and improved equipment and procedures already pointed toward the future of cave diving safety. It showed the difference between improvising in a cave and organising a cave operation. That difference would become central after 1973. The shaft had taken 4 lives, but it had also shown why good intentions and general diving experience were not enough. It had shown that a deep cave can defeat both recreational divers and unprepared recovery teams. It had shown that landowners, police and divers needed clearer systems before the next emergency. It had shown that safety could not be left to confidence, memory, or the assumption that a clear chamber was a manageable chamber. By April 1974, when John Bockerman was finally recovered, the physical waiting ended. The cave no longer held the bodies of the 4 divers. But the story did not return to what it had been before. The shaft was not simply reopened as if nothing had happened. The accident had already begun changing the future of cave diving in Australia. The long search and recovery had made the lesson public, practical, and impossible to ignore. What had started as a weekend dive had become a turning point, and the next question was not only how the 4 divers had died, but what the diving community would do with the knowledge their deaths had left behind. The tragedy at the shaft revealed something that many divers now understand as basic, but which was still being learned painfully in the early years of Australian cave diving. It revealed that cave diving is not simply scuba diving in a more interesting place. It is not ordinary diving with a ceiling added. It is a separate discipline, with its own rules, its own equipment demands, its own navigation problems, and its own way of thinking. A diver can be capable in open water and still be unprepared for a cave. A diver can be calm, strong, and experienced, and still be in the wrong environment with the wrong plan. The accident showed this with terrible clarity. The 4 divers who died at the shaft went beyond the limit the group had discussed, entered a darker and deeper section without a proper continuous guideline, became disoriented, exhausted their breathing air, and drowned. Their deaths were not attributed to contaminated air. Later testing found the air and compressor within relevant standards, and the coroner concluded that they had overstayed their bottom time, run out of air, and died of hypoxia as part of drowning. That finding matters because it removes a comforting explanation. If the air had been poisoned, if a single piece of equipment had failed, if something strange and external had happened, then the accident might have seemed separate from ordinary diving decisions. But the investigation pointed to planning, limits, gas, navigation, experience, and the environment itself. Those are not mysterious forces, they are the daily substance of cave diving safety. The tragedy revealed that the real danger was not hidden in the cylinder. It was in the mismatch between the dive being attempted and the systems used to attempt it. The first lesson was about the overhead environment. In open water, a diver usually has a direct route upward to air. That does not make open water diving harmless, of course. Divers still have to manage ascent rates, decompression, buoyancy, currents, waves, boats, cold, equipment, and their own breathing. But the idea of escape is often vertical. If the dive must end, the surface is above. In a cave, that simple relationship disappears. The surface may be behind you. It may be through a passage, around a slope, past a rock pile, and back under a small entrance. A diver can swim upward and meet only stone. That's exactly what made the shaft so dangerous. The entrance was small and specific. It did not sit above the whole chamber like an open lake. The divers had to return to the correct place. Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts, according to survivor accounts, swam upward into a ceiling dome with no exit while trying to return, showing the fatal difference between up and out. In a cave, upward can feel like instinct, but instinct is not navigation. The tragedy made that distinction impossible to ignore. It showed that an exit must be treated as a route, not a direction, not a feeling, not a memory of where the light used to be, a route. In modern cave diving, that idea is protected by the use of a continuous guideline. Training standards from the National Speleological Society Cave Diving section state that students are to maintain a continuous guideline to a safe exit during training dives, and modern technical cave training also requires a continuous guideline and proper cave diving equipment. A guideline may seem almost too simple to carry so much importance. It is just line, thin, ordinary, not very dramatic. But inside a cave it becomes a physical memory that does not panic. It remembers the way out when the diver cannot. It remains useful when visibility collapses. It can be followed by touch when the water turns into silt and the torch becomes nearly useless. It turns a cave from a three-dimensional guess into a route that can be retraced. The shaft showed what happens when that protection is missing. A shot line had been used to help with the descent toward the rock pile, but that is not the same thing as a continuous cave guideline through the route being explored. The divers moved beyond the area where the line could protect them. Once they were beyond the agreed boundary and away from reliable daylight, they were depending on visibility, memory, and judgment. Those are weak tools in a deep cave, especially when stress and nitrogen narcosis are present. The second lesson was about gas. Air is time underwater, but in a cave it is more than time. It is travel distance, problem-solving room, and the ability to help another person. The divers who died did not drown because they forgot that they needed air. They drowned because the amount of air they had was not managed in a way that matched the environment, the depth, and the possibility of delay. At depth, each breath uses more gas than the same breath near the surface. If a diver is anxious, working hard, searching, or impaired, breathing can speed up sharply. A cylinder that seemed adequate near the beginning can become frighteningly low before the exit's found. Modern cave diving treats gas planning as a central safety rule, not a casual estimate. The well-known rule of thirds, in its simple form, reserves 1/3 of starting gas for penetration, 1/3 for exit, and 1/3 for emergencies. Training organisations may adapt gas rules depending on dive type, equipment, and conditions, but the principle remains the same. A diver does not use most of the gas going in and hope that coming out will be faster. Hope is not a reserve cylinder. Technical cave training standards still describe penetration limits by gas rules, maximum depth, continuous guideline use, and proper cave equipment. The shaft revealed why this matters. The divers were deep, farther into the cave than planned, with a route that had become uncertain. That meant the return could not be assumed to take the same time as the entry. It might take longer. It might involve searching. It might involve helping someone else. It might involve poor visibility. It might involve stress. All of those possibilities require reserve gas. A cave dive is not planned for the best possible exit. It is planned for a bad exit that still has to succeed. The third lesson was about depth and narcosis. The group reached depths at which nitrogen narcosis was a serious factor. Robert Smith reportedly turned back after feeling narcosis around 180 feet, and that decision likely saved him. John Bockerman was later seen swimming strongly deeper into the cave, with accounts suggesting severe narcosis may have affected his judgment. Narcosis is not dramatic in the way films often make danger dramatic. It may not look like panic. It may look like confidence. It may feel like calm. It may make a diver slow to respond, too willing to continue, or strangely certain of a wrong choice. That makes it especially dangerous in a cave, because cave diving depends on clear judgment. The diver must monitor gas, depth, direction, team position, time, lights, line, and the shape of the cave. A small reduction in judgment can have large consequences. The deeper the dive, the less forgiving the cave becomes. The accident also revealed that being an instructor or experienced open water diver did not automatically make someone a sinkhole or cave diver. The coroner's findings noted that although members of the group claimed experience, and some were instructors, they were not experienced sinkhole divers and proper safety precautions had not been taken. That was an uncomfortable but necessary distinction. General diving confidence can become dangerous when it is carried into a specialised environment without specialised training. The fourth lesson was about group control. 8 divers entered the water. That is a large number for a demanding overhead environment, especially without strict team structure. Public accounts describe no proper buddy pair system and no disciplined cave diving team procedure of the sort expected now. When the dive began to exceed the plan, different divers made different choices. Some returned, some hesitated, some continued, some became lost. The group ceased to function as one controlled safety unit. A group can feel safer than it really is. It is comforting to see other lights, other divers, other people sharing the same direction, but a loose group can also spread responsibility until nobody is clearly holding it. A diver may assume someone else knows the way, someone else is watching the time, someone else has checked the gas, someone else is leading, someone else will turn the dive if needed. Underwater, that assumption can become fatal. In a cave, a team must not be merely a collection of people in the same place. It must be a working system. The shaft showed what happens when that system breaks apart. Robert Smith turned back. Glenn Millett later joined him. Larry Reynolds returned. Peter Burr escaped with very little air remaining. Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts became lost under the sealing dome. Stephen Millett's exact final movements remain less certain. John Bockerman ended deeper in the cave. The group entered together, but the emergency unfolded separately. That separation is one of the clearest signs that the dive had moved beyond safe control. The fifth lesson was about visibility. The shaft was famous for clear water, and clear water can be persuasive. It can make a place look manageable. It can give a diver the feeling that the cave is readable, that the route is obvious, that the chamber is open enough to understand. But visibility is not permanent. In a cave, silt can lift quickly. Bubbles, fin kicks, hand movements and stress can turn clear water into a cloud. After the accident, Glenn Millott returned to search and found Stephen Millott's torch and camera near the deeper edge, but the water was heavily silted and visibility had fallen almost to zero. That is one of the defining hazards of cave diving. A cave can change after you enter it. Not because the walls move, but because visibility changes. The route that looked clear on the way in can be hidden on the way out. A diver who entered by sight may have to leave by touch. Without a line, that becomes guesswork. And guesswork inside a cave is not a plan. It is a last desperate substitute for one. The accident also revealed how rescue and recovery differ in caves. In many emergencies, people imagine that if something goes wrong, help will come. That is a natural thought. It is comforting. But in a deep flooded cave, help must pass through the same hazard. Search divers must manage their own gas, depth, narcosis, decompression, visibility, navigation, and exit. The first police searches after the accident were brief and unsuccessful, and the operation was postponed while teams sought more expertise and training. The final body was not recovered until April 9th, 1974, 11 months and 11 days after the accident. That long recovery revealed that prevention is far more reliable than rescue, not because rescuers lack courage, quite the opposite. The recovery divers showed courage and discipline, but courage cannot remove depth. It cannot clear silt instantly. It cannot make a small entrance wide or a dark chamber simple. Rescue in a cave is technically difficult, slow and dangerous. If a diver's safety plan depends on being rescued quickly after becoming lost, the plan has already failed. The tragedy also revealed a wider public problem. The shaft was not only a private accident among divers, it became a public event. 4 people died. Bodies remained unrecovered for months. Police, landowners, government, divers and newspapers all had to respond. The Cave Divers Association of Australia states that the shaft had been a popular diving hole in the late 1960s and early 1970s, but was closed in 1973 after the 4 deaths. The public outcry became a major reason for the formation of the CDAA, which sought to self-regulate cave diving before the government banned it. That point is crucial. The tragedy revealed that if divers did not organise themselves, someone else might organise them from outside the sport or stop access altogether. Landowners had reason to be frightened. Government had reason to act. The public had reason to ask why people were entering such places without stronger controls. Divers who wanted continued access to caves had to show that they could build a culture of responsibility. This is one of the most important ways the shaft changed cave diving. It did not only teach individual divers to be more careful. It pushed the community toward formal structure. Access had to be controlled, sites had to be rated, divers had to be trained for the environments they entered. Landowners needed assurance that not every person with scuba gear would be allowed into a sinkhole. The sport needed standards, not just stories passed between divers. Modern CDAA training reflects this structured approach. Its basic cave diver program is described as covering the skills and knowledge necessary to safely dive in cavern and sinkhole-rated sites, including environments that may have zero visibility as well as unlimited visibility. That combination is telling. Training is not only for beautiful clear water, it is for the moment when clear water disappears. It is for the moment when the cave becomes difficult, because that is when preparation matters most. The shaft also revealed that labels matter. A sinkhole, a cavern, and a cave are not just different words for a hole with water in it. They carry different levels of overhead risk, daylight depth, navigation complexity, and training requirements. A diver near daylight in a broad chamber is facing one kind of problem. A diver beyond daylight at depth, without a continuous route to open water, is facing another. The environment may change gradually, but the risk changes sharply. The accident showed that crossing that boundary without recognizing it can be fatal. It revealed the danger of just a little farther. The group had agreed not to go beyond the edge, but they did. That sentence is small, and it contains almost the whole tragedy. Not because the edge itself was magical, but because the agreed limit was the point where discipline should have stopped curiosity. Many accidents in caves, mountains, mines, and at sea have this same shape. The plan is safe enough if followed. Then the plan is softened, a little farther, a little deeper, a little longer. The environment accepts the change silently, and the consequences arrive later. That is why modern safety culture treats the turn point as sacred. If the dive is turned because of gas, depth, time, visibility, equipment, team discomfort, or a single diver call in it, the dive is over. Not debated, not renegotiated in the most interesting part of the cave, not postponed because someone wants a better look. A safe return is the purpose of the dive. Seeing the cave is optional, coming back is not. The tragedy revealed something about humility too. The cave was not evil. The water was not waiting to trap anyone. The accident happened because human beings entered an environment that demanded more than they brought. That is a humbling lesson, because it applies beyond diving. Many dangerous places are not obviously hostile. They are quiet. They allow entry. They give early success. They let confidence grow. Then, when conditions change, they reveal that the margin was smaller than people believed. The shaft also showed that safety knowledge often arrives through pain, then becomes routine for later generations. A modern cave diver checking lights, gas line, training limits, team roles, and turn pressures may be following procedures shaped by many accidents, including this one. The routine can look almost dull from outside. Check, confirm, tie in, signal, turn, exit. But dull procedure is often the polished surface of old grief. It exists because someone, somewhere, learned what happens without it. There is no need to make the lesson mystical. The tragedy revealed practical things. Use a continuous guideline. Manage gas conservatively. Stay within training. Keep the team together. Respect depth. Plan for silt. Do not enter beyond daylight without cave training. Turn the dive when the first limit is reached. Do not confuse open water skill with cave skill. Do not let the beauty of clear water replace the discipline of a real exit plan. It also revealed that cave diving can never be made casual. It can be made safer. It can be trained, regulated, planned, and conducted with great professionalism. But it remains an activity that takes place in an environment where ordinary escape is removed. That fact is not a reason for panic. It is a reason for honesty. Cave divers do not survive because caves are safe. They survive because they behave as if caves are serious. The shaft forced that seriousness into public view. Before the accident, it was a popular site, known for its unusual entrance and clear water. After the accident, it became evidence. Evidence that access needed control. Evidence that confidence was not enough. Evidence that recovery could be harder than anyone wanted to admit. Evidence that the difference between a successful dive and a fatal one might be a line, a gas rule, a turn signal, or one diver being willing to stop the group before the cave became more interesting than the plan. And that is where the tragedy begins to become something larger than the day itself. It remains a human loss first. Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman did not die so that a lesson could be written neatly afterward. They died because a dive went wrong. The lesson came later because other people looked at what happened and understood that the same chain had to be broken before it repeated. The next part of the story is about that change, and about how one dark accident in a quiet paddock helped turn Australian cave diving toward rules, training, access control, and a new kind of respect for the hidden water beneath the limestone. The change did not arrive as one neat announcement, and it did not make cave diving safe overnight. That is not how safety changes usually happen. They arrive through meetings, arguments, rules, training notes, access agreements, and people repeating the same hard lessons until they become normal. The shaft did not create cave diving safety by itself, but it forced a question into the open. If divers were going to keep entering flooded caves and sinkholes, who would decide how they did it? Who would decide who was ready? Who would speak to landowners? Who would explain the difference between an open water diver and a cave diver? And who would make sure that a small hole in a paddock did not remain just an adventure story until the next tragedy? The Cave Divers Association of Australia says the shaft had been a very popular diving hole in the late 1960s and early 1970s, but it was closed in 1973 after 4 divers died there. The same CDAA site description says the public outcry after the accident was the major reason for the formation of the CDAA, which aimed to self-regulate cave diving before the government banned it. That is a very direct legacy. 4 people died, the public reacted, government attention grew, and divers understood that if they did not build a responsible system themselves, access to these places might disappear altogether. That is one of the most practical ways the shaft changed cave diving. It moved the sport away from informal confidence and toward organised responsibility. Before the accident, a person with scuba gear, enthusiasm, and enough connections might gain access to places that demanded far more than general diving skill. Afterward, the idea of letting anyone with ordinary recreational equipment enter a deep sinkhole became much harder to defend. Landowners had seen what could happen on private property. Police had seen how difficult recovery could be. Divers had seen that a serious accident could threaten everyone's access, not only the people involved on one weekend. The tragedy created pressure from several directions at once. Families wanted answers. The public wanted reassurance. Authorities wanted control. Landowners wanted safety and legal protection. Serious divers wanted continued access, but they also knew that continued access would require trust. Trust is not built by saying, "We know what we are doing," and then refusing to show how. It is built by standards, records, training, supervision, and a willingness to tell someone no. That word no became important. No, not without training. No, not beyond that rating. No, not without the right equipment. No, not today if the conditions are wrong. No, not just because you have dived in the sea before. It sounds harsh when you say it plainly. But in cave diving, no can be a very generous word. It can protect the diver who feels eager. It can protect the landowner who was allowed access. It can protect the rescue team that would otherwise be asked to enter the same dangerous place later. It can protect the future of the sport. A good safety culture is not only a culture of doing difficult things well, it is also a culture of not doing them when the plan, the diver, the equipment, or the conditions are not right. The formation of the CDAA gave Australian cave diving a body that could speak for the community and set expectations. That mattered because cave diving sites in the Mount Gambier region are not ordinary public swimming spots. Many are on private land. Many require cooperation with landowners. Many carry different levels of risk. Without a trusted system, access would always be fragile. A landowner might close a site after an incident. Government might restrict whole categories of diving. The public might see the sport as reckless, not specialised. The CDAA's role was not simply to encourage cave diving. It was to make cave diving defensible. That meant turning experience into rules. Rules can sometimes feel like the boring part of adventure, which is unfair, because rules are often what allow adventure to continue. Without rules, one person's poor decision can close a site for everyone. Without rules, landowners may decide the risk is not worth it. Without rules, divers may push into places they do not understand, and then other people have to recover them. The rules are not there because caves changed after 1973. The caves remained what they had always been. The divers had to change. One of the biggest changes was the idea of rating sites and matching divers to those ratings. Not every flooded hole is the same. A cavern where daylight is always visible is not the same as a deeper sinkhole. A sinkhole is not the same as a full cave with darkness zones, silt, and passages. A complex cave is not the same as a simple open chamber. These distinctions may sound technical, but they are really about one basic question. What kind of exit problem does this place create? A simple open water site gives a diver one kind of exit problem. A cavern gives another. A sinkhole deeper than ordinary recreational limits gives another. A cave with overhead passages, silt and darkness gives another. The shaft showed that if people do not understand the kind of exit problem they are entering, they may bring the wrong habits into the wrong place. They may think of the surface as above when the surface is actually back along a route. They may trust clear water when they should trust a line. They may trust a group when they should have a formal team. They may trust a full cylinder at the start when they should have a gas plan for the worst part of the return. Modern CDAA training reflects the lessons that places like the shaft made impossible to ignore. The CDAA describes its basic cave diver program as the skills and knowledge needed to safely dive in cavern and sinkhole-rated sites, including conditions that may have zero visibility as well as unlimited visibility. Its cave diver training describes caves as enclosed bodies of water with overhangs, silt, darkness zones and passages, and its listed theory includes line techniques, underwater communication, emergency problem solving, cave conservation, air consumption, physiological considerations, access protocols, and accident analysis. Those training topics read almost like answers to the accident. Line techniques answer the problem of getting lost. Gas management answers the problem of running out of air far from a direct exit. Anti-silting answers the problem of a clear route turning into a blind one. Underwater communication answers the problem of a group failing to act as one team. Physiological considerations answer the danger of depth, narcosis, stress, and breathing rate. Access protocols answer the problem of private land and public trust. Accident analysis answers the most human need of all, which is to look honestly at what went wrong and not let it become only a sad story. The equipment changed too. Modern cave diving equipment is built around redundancy. Not one light, but backups. Not one simple gas supply for a casual swim, but configurations that provide more breathing gas and more options if something fails. Not a vague memory of the way out, but reels, guidelines, markers, and procedures for following a line even when visibility disappears. The CDAA's current cave diver equipment list includes twin cylinders with a minimum combined capacity, 2 first stage regulators, 1 primary and 2 backup lights, a primary reel, jump reels or spools, line arrows, personal markers, cutting device, compass, and wet notes or slate. That list is not decoration. Every item exists because a cave can remove a simple option. If one light fails, darkness cannot be allowed to win immediately. If one regulator fails, the diver needs another way to breathe. If visibility falls, the line and markers must replace sight. If a diver becomes entangled, a cutting tool may matter. If communication is needed, wet notes or slate may help where speech is impossible. The equipment does not make the cave harmless. It creates layers of response. In cave diving, safety is often not one big thing. It is many small protections stacked together before the dive begins. The shaft also changed the way people thought about access. After the accident, the site was closed, and attempts to renew access continued for years. The CDAA's site history says that in late 1983, a successful CDAA research group project at Kilsby's Hole helped support renewed negotiations for the shaft, and a mapping project was approved and completed in 1984. Later, divers who were trusted by the owners formed a group to organise schedules and set diving standards so qualified CDAA members could visit. Today, the CDAA access notes for the shaft state, that the landowner mandates dive supervisors with their own insurance to lead all diving activities. That is a very different world from an informal weekend trip. The entrance is still small, the chamber is still there, the water is still deep, but the human system around the place has changed. Access is not only about whether a diver wants to go in, it is about whether the diver is qualified, whether the site is being supervised, whether the landowner's conditions are met, whether the schedule is organised and whether the standards are followed. The cave did not become more forgiving. People became less casual. The mapping work mattered as well. A cave that is unmapped is not only unknown, it is harder to manage, harder to train for, harder to describe and harder to recover from if something goes wrong. Mapping does not remove risk, but it turns mystery into information. It helps divers understand the shape of the chamber, the depth, the restrictions, the possible routes, and the areas where confusion is most likely. In the years after the shaft accident, mapping and research became part of rebuilding trust. It was a way of saying, we are not just visiting these places, we are studying them, documenting them, and learning how to treat them properly. That change is important because cave diving has two sides. It has the adventure side, the pull toward hidden places, clear water and unusual geology. But it also has a research side, a conservation side, and a discipline side. The best cave diving culture holds those together. It does not treat caves as playgrounds. It treats them as fragile, dangerous, valuable places where access must be earned. A cave can be beautiful and still require a strict plan. A dive can be exciting and still be cancelled. A diver can be skilled and still turn around early. In fact, the most skilled divers often turn around early because they know exactly how little the cave owes them. The shaft also changed cave diving by becoming a story that instructors could use, not as entertainment, not as a way to frighten people for effect, as a case study. A case study is a careful thing. It asks what happened, what conditions existed, what decisions were made, what protections were missing, and how the chain could have been broken. In that sense, Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bockerman became part of a safety memory that later divers carried with them, whether or not they knew the names in detail. Every time a diver ties into a guideline before entering an overhead. Every time a team turns because one diver is uncomfortable. Every time a diver checks gas and refuses to go a little farther. Every time access is limited to qualified people only. The old lesson is present. That does not make the loss less serious. It does not turn death into a useful object. It simply means people chose not to waste the lesson. There is a difference between remembering and learning. Remembering says something terrible happened there. Learning says, because something terrible happened there, we will behave differently here. The shaft forced Australian cave divers to do both. It had to be remembered because 4 people died. It had to be learned from because the same conditions could appear again in another sinkhole, another chamber, another group, another weekend. The accident also changed how people outside the sport saw cave diving. Before the shaft, many members of the public may have thought of cave diving as a strange hobby, dangerous perhaps, but distant. Afterward, it became a public safety issue. Bodies remained unrecovered for months. Police divers struggled with the conditions. Newspapers reported on the tragedy. Landowners had to consider responsibility. Government could not ignore the possibility of future accidents. Cave diving was no longer just something divers discussed among themselves. It had entered public life. That public pressure was uncomfortable, but it may have been necessary. Sports that operate in hidden environments can drift if there is no outside accountability. A cave is out of sight. The decisions made there are hard for outsiders to understand. That makes self-regulation even more important, because if the community does not regulate itself, outside regulation may come suddenly and bluntly. The CDAA's formation was, in part, a response to that risk. It was a way for divers to say, we understand the danger, and we are building a system to manage it. The system did not depend only on bravery. Bravery is easy to admire, but it is not enough. A brave person can swim the wrong way. A brave person can run out of air. A brave person can lose a line. A brave person can ignore a turn pressure. What cave diving needed after the shaft was not more bravery. It needed competence, structure, humility and refusal. It needed divers who were willing to prepare more than they performed. It needed people who understood that the safest cave dive might be the one that ends before anything dramatic happens. The story also changed the way many divers think about the phrase experienced diver. Experience is not a single container. A diver may have hundreds of open water dives and still be new to caves. A diver may be comfortable at night and still untrained for silt. A diver may be an instructor in one environment and a beginner in another. The shaft made that distinction painfully visible. The question is not, are you experienced? The better question is, experienced at what, under what conditions, with what equipment, and within what limits? That lesson reaches beyond diving. A person can be experienced in one kind of risk and unprepared for another. A good mountain walker may not be ready for winter climbing. A careful driver may not be ready for high-speed racing. A strong swimmer may not understand cave diving. Skill does not automatically transfer just because two activities look related from a distance. Water is water, perhaps, but open water and overhead cave water are not the same world. The shaft changed cave diving forever because it forced that difference into rules. It helped make cave diving more formal, more cautious, more accountable, and more honest about its own hazards. It influenced access restrictions. It helped drive the formation of the CDAA. It became part of the development of organised training, site ratings, supervision, mapping, and accident analysis. It showed that emergency recovery in caves required specialised preparation. It taught that landowners and divers needed a shared system. It made clear that the route out must be protected before the route in becomes interesting. And still, after all of that, the shaft remains what it always was in physical terms: a small entrance in limestone country, water below, a chamber hidden under land that looks ordinary from above. The cave has not learned anything. The water has not become kinder. The rock has not become more patient. The learning happened in people. That is where safety lives. Not in the cave, but in the choices made before entering it. When divers visit controlled sites today, they carry more than equipment. They carry a culture built from accidents, near misses, research, training, and the decisions of people who wanted the sport to continue without pretending it was casual. They carry checklists, reels, backup lights, gas rules, certifications, access permits, and a habit of asking what could go wrong before the cave has a chance to answer. Some of that culture can be traced back to the shaft, not because it was the only accident that mattered, but because it was severe, public, prolonged, and impossible to ignore. So when we say the shaft changed cave diving forever, we should mean something specific. It changed who could enter. It changed how sites were controlled. It changed how divers were trained. It changed how landowners and divers worked together. It changed how recovery teams understood deep cave operations. It changed the way Australian cave diving presented itself to the public. Most of all, it changed the attitude around hidden water. Curiosity remained, but curiosity had to be accompanied by proof of readiness. That is a hard legacy, but it is also a useful one. Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts and John Bockerman went into the shaft during a weekend adventure and did not return. Their deaths should not be softened into a simple lesson, because they were people first, not examples. But after the grief, after the waiting, after the recoveries and after the public outcry, the diving community faced a choice. It could treat the accident as bad luck and continue as before, or it could admit that the system had failed and build something stronger. The stronger path was the one that lasted. And now, decades later, the story still asks for care. It asks divers to respect the line. It asks them to respect gas. It asks them to respect depth, silt, darkness, and the quiet pressure of a group wanting to continue. It asks landowners and organisations to keep standards firm. It asks anyone hearing the story to understand that some places are not dangerous because they look wild. Some are dangerous because they look calm enough to trust. The small hole in the paddock is still a powerful image because it says so much with so little. Above, the ordinary world. Below, a hidden chamber. Between them, a narrow entrance that allows people to pass only if they have earned the right to do so carefully. In 1973, that entrance became the centre of a tragedy. In the years after, it became part of a safety culture. The story of the shaft did not remove the danger from cave diving. It made the danger harder to deny, and that changed everything. And so, as we come back to the surface of this long and difficult story, we return to the same simple thought that has followed us from the beginning. The way in is not enough. The beauty of a hidden place is not enough. Confidence is not enough. What matters is the way back, planned before the first descent, protected through every decision, and respected even when curiosity asks for just a little more. If this story stayed with you, if it helped you understand not only what happened at the shaft but why it mattered, I would be grateful if you gave the video a like and subscribed. It helps this quiet space reach others who like careful stories, real history, and the lessons hidden inside difficult events. And wherever you are listening from tonight, far from limestone country or close to water of your own, may the room around you feel steady, the air feel easy, and the surface feel near. Sleep well, fellow traveller, and remember that some of the deepest lessons are learned by coming back.